Imagine, if you will, the divine, not as some fixed point up there, but maybe like a celestial cartographer, meticulously charting these unfathomable territories of existence from way beyond the storms we see.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
It's a notion that really shimmers through this ancient scroll we're, unfurling today. Excerpts from Iamblichus's De Mysteriis.
Right.
And this isn't just about dusting off a relic, it's a plunge into ideas about the very architecture of the sacred and its honestly bewilderingly intimate relationship with our cosmos, with ourselves. Forget dry scholarship for a second. This feels like a living spring of thought, surprisingly vital.
Precisely. We're stepping into the intellectual and really the spiritual landscape of Iamblichus. He's such a pivotal figure, bridging Neoplatonic philosophy and, the evocative practices of the theurgy, that compelling dance between the human and the divine.
Theurgy, yeah.
And De Mysteriis isn't some dusty old treatise, it's vibrant. It's an exploration where rigorous thought meets this profound, almost visceral, yearning for connection with the transcendent. Think of it like a blueprint, maybe, for navigating the subtle currents between worlds.
Okay, so our expedition today, which you've already started just by tuning in, is to kind of map the contours of Iamblichus's vision of the cosmos. It's breathtaking, really.
It is.
We want to unpack his perspective on how we might connect, audaciously perhaps, with the transcendent. We'll be grappling with questions that still echo. What is the ultimate source of everything? What's the hidden structure of reality? And what do we do with these age-old sacred practices that just hum with this enduring power? Okay, let's begin our descent, starting with Iamblichus's concept of the utterly transcendent God.
Right. And what immediately grabs you is his portrayal of this highest God. It's a divinity that exists before even the idea of coming into being. Formless, totally self-sufficient, the very source from which all existence, all the powers within the elements, everything springs.
So not tied to the cosmos.
No, not tethered to it. It's more like the bedrock upon which the cosmos is built. It encompasses everything, but remains fundamentally distinct, like the silent canvas for the masterpiece of creation.
It's a fascinating paradox, isn't it? This God is revealed through the cosmos, through his sheer beauty and complexity.
Yes.
But at the same time, Iamblichus insists on this God's radical otherness, its elevation far, far beyond those cosmic powers and the basic stuff of our reality. And the imagery he uses here is so evocative. These striking symbol.
Absolutely. Take the image of the loidos, that water plant.
Okay.
Iamblichus uses it as this potent symbol of God's transcendence, its ability to remain untouched by matter, never really submerged or defined by it. It signifies his intellectual sovereignty, a state of pristine being.
Untouched.
Exactly. And then he points to its circular forms, the leaves, the fruits, and connects that geometry to the ceaseless, uniform motion of nous, of intellect, perfect, self-contained thought, always contemplating itself.
Right, that sense of completeness, self-reference. And then there's this other image, almost jarringly different. A pilot navigating a ship.
Yes, and that, I think, grounds the abstract in something more tangible.
Yeah.
This symbol highlights God's governance, like a pilot at the stern involved in directing the ship. But separate from its hull, the divine gives that first impulse of motion from a higher place. It's not constantly tinkering, but setting the course from, beyond the immediate chaos.
So this first impulse, Does it just happen once, or does the divine interaction keep unfolding? Because then Iamblichus looks at the sun and how our symbolic grasp of God seems to change with the zodiac with time.
This is a key insight. The shifting symbols tied to the zodiac's dance and the cycles of time signify the continuous flow of divine energies, radiating from the sun into every part of the cosmos.
Like light hitting different surfaces.
Exactly. Like a single source casting light and warmth in countless ways, each adapted to whatever receives it.
So the manifestations are incredibly diverse. All those zodiac signs, the daily changes of light, but the source itself, the sun in this analogy, ultimately pointing back to God, stays unchanged. A single power received multifaceted ways.
Precisely. And Iamblichus even brings up the ancient Egyptian prayers to the sun as real examples of this understanding. This symbolic worship acknowledging the diverse yet unified divine. It shows these aren't just philosophical ideas, but part of actual spiritual practice.
Which leads us naturally to something that always struck me as, well, really enigmatic. The power he gives to those unpronounceable, seemingly barbaric divine names. What's the key there? Why focus on sounds that resist easy translation?
This gets right to the heart of how Iamblichus saw the link between language and the sacred.
Yeah.
He makes it clear these names aren't just noise. They hold profound meaning for the gods themselves.
Not for us necessarily.
Not in the way we usually think of meaning, through grammar or mental pictures. It's about a deeper connection, more primal.
So it's not about what our intellect can easily decode.
Exactly. The link is intellectual, almost. Ineffable. These names are woven into the divine fabric in a way that goes beyond simple definition. Iamblichus tells us to shed our usual human concepts, our need for logical interpretation, when we use these sacred names. The focus should be on their symbolic resonance, how they mirror the divine likeness.
So even if a name is completely opaque to us, that very obscurity points to its sacredness, like its inaccessibility is part of its power.
That's a brilliant way to put it, yes. It suggests a reality beyond our normal grasp. But interestingly, he also says that for names where we do have some understanding of their origins, they can offer real glimpses into the divine essence, its power, its order. It's not totally black and white, knowable versus unknowable, it's more of a spectrum.
And then there's this clear preference for barbaric languages, Assyrian, Egyptian, non-Greek ones. That seems odd for a Greek philosopher, right? A champion of Hellenic thought.
It does seem paradoxical at first glance. But Iamblichus explains that these languages were considered inherently sacred by the nations that used them. The belief was the gods themselves had revealed and consecrated these entire linguistic systems.
Oh, okay.
So prayers and invocations in those original languages were thought to have a unique power, a more direct line to the divine source.
Like tapping into an original, undiluted wellspring of sacred sound. And this tradition of carefully preserving these names with their inherent power, it speaks to a real reverence for antiquity, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The perceived connection is between the eternal, unchanging nature of the gods and these ancient, seemingly fixed linguistic forms. Guarding the names becomes a way of guarding that sacred bond through time.
But what about the argument that meaning is deeper than the actual name? Surely if the core idea is the same, the specific word shouldn't matter that much.
Iamblichus tackles that head-on. He argues against purely conventional names, ones just made up by human agreement. He believes names with an intrinsic natural connection to the beings they represent are just more pleasing, more resonant for the gods. There's a deeper sympathy, you could say.
And translation then inevitably loses something, dilutes that original power.
Exactly. He argues translation can't fully capture that original potency. Each language has unique sounds, structures, nuances that you just can't perfectly transfer. You might get the concept across roughly, but the inherent force, the specific energetic signature of the original sacred name gets diminished.
And these barbaric names, he suggests, have this almost primal quality. Great emphasis, brevity, less ambiguity, like their very form aligns better with higher principles.
Precisely. Their structure, their sound is believed to resonate more powerfully with the divine reality they invoke.
Okay, so we have this transcendent God, often symbolized by the sun, and these powerful, often non-Greek linguistic keys. But how does creation actually happen in Iamblichus's cosmic view? Where do the foundational principles come in?
Right, this is where he lays out a really detailed hierarchical cosmology. He starts with a single, ultimate God, a profound oneness that exists even before being itself, before all other principles.
Wow.
This first God stays in solitary unity, untouched by intellect or anything else differentiated. It's the archetype of the self-originated soul father God, the truly good in its most unmanifest form. Imagine the silent, fertile void holding all potential.
So a level of divinity that's almost beyond our concepts, the source from which everything else flows.
Exactly. And from this oneness emerges the self-governing God, often called the Father of himself, the God of gods. This is the monad proceeding from the one, the pre-existent principle of all essence. It's from this divinity that ousia's essentiality and ousia essence come from, making this God the Father of essence in the intellectual world that noetarches the peak of the intellectual realm.
It's like a cascade of divine becoming, a flowing out of being itself. And then Hermes, the thrice great, fits into this picture how?
Right. Iamblichus draws on the wisdom credited to Hermes, saying his writings place these primary principles before even the celestial, ethereal, and empyrean gods. He hints at the huge number of Hermetic texts explaining each realm, showing how crucial these first principles are for creation's unfolding.
It's an incredibly intricate structure of the sacred. And there's another order with this figure, Kmeth, leading the celestial gods.
Yes, Kmeth is described as intellect contemplating itself, consciousness turned inward. His main mayuma, or unfolding, is called Eichten. This represents the very first stirring of intellect and the first intelligible thing, so fundamental it's honored best through silence.
Silence as the ultimate reverence, acknowledging what can't be spoken. That feels right. And then we move into manifest creation with figures like Amun, Fiha, Osiris playing key roles.
Exactly. Amun is the creative intellect, bringing hidden reasons into light. Fitha is the divine craftsman, representing skill and truth, bringing things to perfect completion. And Osiris embodies goodness itself, the force behind everything beneficial and life-giving. Each god oversees connected but distinct parts of creation.
So we see this elegant flow from the Absolute One through layers of divine mind and creative power. And this hierarchy is reflected in the Egyptian view of the cosmos itself, right? This nested structure.
Absolutely. Their cosmology saw governance over the elements and their powers coming from the sun, the source of 4 male and 4 female principles. The moon was seen as the source of all generative nature.
Okay.
And the heavens themselves were divided, with many rulers assigned to different sections, but all under one single overarching ruler.
The many governed by the one. It's a theme that keeps coming back, a unified source behind all the diversity.
Precisely. And even matter itself, in this Egyptian view, came from a separated, almost leftover aspect of essentiality. The demiurge, the divine craftsman, then shaped this into the simple, impassible spheres. Its lowest part became our familiar world of generation and decay, constant change.
This layered view helps make sense of potentially different accounts in writings linked to Hermes or others. They weren't all talking about the same level, necessarily.
Exactly right. Writings attributed to Hermes, even if they use Greek philosophical terms, basically convey Hermetic doctrines rooted in Egyptian wisdom, often filtered by those familiar with Greek thought. Thoughts like Shurman focus more on the ultimate underlying principles of the cosmos.
And those talking about planets, zodiacs, horoscopes.
They're essentially mapping the more specific ways these big principles manifest and are distributed.
And the Samaskiniac texts are just a small piece of the puzzle.
Just a fragment, yes. And Egyptian explanations for things like star movements, moon phases, eclipses, those belong to these more immediate levels of cause and effect, the things we can more easily observe.
It's like different lenses showing different facets of the same reality. And it seems the Egyptians had a really sophisticated understanding of the difference between the natural world and the realms of soul and intellect.
Absolutely. They didn't just lump everything together as natural. They clearly separated the life of the soul and the power of intellect from nature, not just universally, but within us too. They strongly believed intellect and reason exist independently. They're the means by which things are created.
They even conceived of a progenitor of the creator. That's incredibly abstract.
Yes. And they had a complex understanding of the vital power before and within the heavens. They pictured a pure intellect above the cosmos, one undivided intellect throughout everything, and another intellect divided among all the different spheres.
So a unified cosmic mind expressing itself in countless individual ways. And this wasn't just theory for them, was it? It involved active practice.
Exactly. Through the Ergi, they tried to ascend to these higher, more universal levels, to go beyond fate itself. They focused on finding the right moment, the kairos, for divine interaction. It was a very active, participatory relationship with these higher realities.
And Hermes is the key guide in this tradition, the revealer.
Definitely. Iamblichus consistently points to Hermes as the initiator and guide of this whole intellectual and spiritual path. He even tells that story about the prophet Bedes deciphering an ancient hieroglyphic text found in Seas, Egypt, a text revealing God's name pervading the whole cosmos.
Wow. It really highlights the Egyptians' deep connection to this sacred knowledge and their belief in multiple layers of being, including supercosmic powers you could engage with through theurgy. It pushes back hard against any purely materialist view of their belief.
Indeed. Iamblichus is clearly arguing for a much more nuanced, multifaceted, and deeply spiritual view of Egyptian cosmology and theurgy.
Okay, now, a question that always comes up when we talk about cosmic forces and divine influence. What about human agency? Free will. Did the Egyptians think everything up to us was just dictated by the stars, by fate?
This is a really crucial distinction they made. Iamblichus, drawing on Hermetic wisdom, explains that humans have a dual nature, reflected in two different souls. One soul comes from the realm of the first intelligible, participating directly in the demiurge's creative power.
Okay, a higher soul.
Yes. And the other soul is given to us from the celestial cycles, the realm the theoptic, the divinely aware soul enters into.
So we have one soul with this higher origin and another more tied to cosmic rhythms.
Exactly. The soul descending from the cosmos naturally follows those cosmic currents. It's subject to fate. But the soul from the intelligible realm, being intellectual in essence, transcends those cycles. It's by cultivating and activating this higher part of us that liberation from fate and ascent to the intelligible gods becomes possible. Theurgy, aimed at the unbegotten source, works through this higher part of our existence.
So the cosmic script isn't totally fixed, not an unbreakable chain of fate. There's a way out.
Absolutely. The soul has its own power to turn towards the intelligible, to consciously pull away of the merely generated and seek union with the real, the divine. Even the gods themselves, Iamblichus points out, aren't subject to fate. They're honored in temples and statues as the very liberators from fate.
So the gods release fate while the lower things coming from them, tied to the world and our bodies, actually carry out fate. That's fascinating.
It explains why all sacred service ultimately goes to the gods, so they might, through their influence, help avert the worst aspects of fate. And crucially, Iamblichus stresses that the soul has a principle superior to both nature and ordinary knowledge.
A principle that lets us ground ourselves in true being, rise above the cosmic order, and share in the eternal life and activity of the supercelestial gods. It's through this that we can, as he says, cleanse ourselves.
Exactly. When the better parts within us are active, when the soul looks upward, it naturally separates from what binds it to generation. It chooses the better path, exchanges one kind of life for another, dedicating itself to a different, higher order.
This idea of self-purification through celestial gods raises an interesting point, though. Can the same gods who guide us also bind us to Earth with unbreakable ties? It suggests a potential paradox in their nature.
Iamblichus acknowledges that tension. He suggests if gods have multiple essences and powers, then seemingly contradictory forces might coexist within them. But he also offers a way to think about it. Within each god, even the visible ones, there are liberating principles that help the soul break free from cosmic generation.
So even within the forces that seem to define our earthly life, there are hidden pathways to freedom.
Precisely. And ultimately, it's the supercosmic gods who are presented as the main agents of the soul's liberation. Iamblichus mentions that the finer details which gods are liberators, their specific powers, how they dissolve fate, the methods of theurgical ascent are covered more deeply in writing specifically about the gods.
He does warn against seeing the gods as changeable or whimsical, like in some Homeric stories. True sacred practice, he insists, follows pure ancient laws.
Exactly. Lower things are always governed by higher orders and greater power. And the soul's descent into generation and its ascent toward the divine aren't really contradictory. Just as intellect and generation coexist in the cosmos, the soul's care for earthly life and its yearning for liberation can exist together in its own ordering.
Let's shift focus now to the individual daemon, that fascinating sort of in-between figure, part divine, part connected to us. Iamblichus looks at this from different angles, doesn't he?
He does. He identifies two main ways of understanding the daemon: the theogonical view, tracing its origin to higher divine causes, and the technical approach, which looks at it through generative cycles, especially natal astrology.
So one is top-down, the other more bottom-up.
Kind of. The theogonical view doesn't depend on your birth chart. The technical view is deeply tied to it. One sees the daemon operating universally, above nature. The other places it specifically within nature and the cosmic order.
And Iamblichus seems a bit critical of reducing the higher theurgy about the daemon just to the human level, just to astrology.
He does seem to find that limiting. He points out that skilled practitioners, when they invoke the daemon, usually draw on a much wider range of cosmic influences: decans, ministers, zodiac signs, planets, elements, the whole cosmos, not just a single snapshot from birth.
So he questions getting too hung up on finding the householder, the oigospes who supposedly gives the daemon, and the exact details of how it emanates or lives.
Exactly. He argues that how the daemon originates doesn't really change its fundamental nature or its influence. Whether we fully grasp the how doesn't diminish its reality or impact. It's like knowing a plant grows from a seed. You don't need to understand all the biochemistry to see the plant.
And the common idea that understanding your birth chart lets you dodge fate by knowing your daemon, Iamblichus finds that logic a bit secular.
He really does, he asks. If the daemon comes from the birth chart and is understood through it, how can knowing this fate-given daemon free you from the fate that defined it? It's a loop. And if sacrifices can avert things through the daemon, how is that still just fate playing out?
So he argues the daemon must have an older, deeper origin than just the birth chart configuration.
Precisely. He contends that real flourishing eudaimonia doesn't just come from knowing the daemon tied to your natal influences. If the daemon was only there to fulfill fate, it couldn't also guide you to avert it. Focusing only on the natal chart gives a very limited view of the daemon's being.
He even addresses the argument that the rules of natal astrology are just too complicated, maybe even incomprehensible.
Yes, he says even if we find the calculations hard to grasp, the star's influence still bestows the daemon, whether we understand the mechanics or not. And divine divination, he suggests, can reveal truths about the stars without needing full astrological expertise.
And he neatly sidesteps the idea that disagreements within astrology invalidate it, pointing out that all sciences face disputes and misunderstandings often fuel objections. It's like the original divine knowledge gets muddied by human interpretation over time.
A very sharp observation. He even points to the long-term accuracy of things like eclipse predictions by the Chaldeans in their own tradition as evidence for underlying truth in this knowledge. But ultimately, he wants to steer the conversation back to the daemon's deeper nature.
So, if the daemon doesn't just come from the natal chart, where does Iamblichus say its true source is?
He reveals that the individual daemon isn't given from just one part of the heavens or one single element, but from the entire cosmos, its diverse life, its very substance. It's through this whole cosmic tapestry that the soul descends into generation, and each person receives a specific portion, guided by a particular overseeing principle.
It's a cosmic inheritance, then, participating in the universe's life, not just an imprint at birth.
Exactly. This daemon is set up as a paradigm before souls even descend. Once the soul chooses its leader, its hegemon, the daemon immediately takes charge of the soul's life, connects it to the body, and governs the whole composite being.
So the daemon is deeply involved in our life's path, the source of our thoughts, influencing our actions through what it brings to mind.
Precisely. And this goes on until, through their theurgy, we consciously install a tutelary god as the soul's leader. Then the daemon's role changes. It might yield to the higher being, step back, assist the god, or serve in some other way under divine command. It's a dynamic relationship.
And the daemon doesn't just govern one part of us, body, soul, or mind, but the whole being. Its influence covers everything.
Yes, reflecting its own origin from all the arrangements in the cosmos. He uses an analogy. Just like lesser daemons might oversee parts of the body health, form, but one protector presides over the whole person, one main daemon governs everything belonging to us.
He strongly warns against splitting the daemon into separate entities for body, soul, intellect. That seems illogical if the living being is one.
Exactly. Rulers, he argues, are usually simpler than what they rule, and it would be even more illogical for different governing daemons to be disconnected rather than linked. Plus, he rejects dividing daemons into good and bad evil. For him, doesn't have its own ruling principle alongside the good.
He then briefly looks at philosophical views, like the idea that the daemon is just a part of the soul itself.
He argues that identifying the daemon as just a part of the soul, like reason, undermines the whole idea of a separate, superior daimonian order guiding humanity. If our highest faculty was the daemon, where would transcendent guidance come from?
And practices involving venerating 2 or 3 daimonic entities, he sees those as mistaken too.
Yes. He argues that dividing the causes presiding over us, instead of unifying them, is flawed and misses the interconnectedness of reality. Limiting the daemon's role just to the body reduces its much larger significance.
So if we each have an individual guardian daemon, why is a single invocation often used in theurgy for the daimonic realm?
That single invocation is directed towards the cosmic god of daemons, the one who initially assigned individual daemons and reveals them in Thorimuji according to his will. It's a basic theogonical principle. You always invoke the lower through the higher. A common ruler sends down the individual daemons.
And when your own daemon shows up in the ritual, it reveals its specific service and name, giving you the right way to invoke it individually.
Exactly. This starts general, then gets specific. Iamblichus also describes the right order of daemons in invocations, one related to the beings invoked, another from higher causes, and a third synthesizing both.
He really stresses not confusing divine invocations with human requests, or timeless divine orders with their limited commands. The scale is just vastly different.
Precisely. He warns against judging daemonian oversight by human weakness, or judging grand, perfect things by our small, fragmented experiences. That's where big errors happen.
Okay, finally, we reach the ultimate goal, eudaimonia, flourishing blessedness. Iamblichus tackles this directly, responding to the kind of questions we still ask, doesn't he?
He does. He starts by asking, could there possibly be another path to eudaimonia that doesn't involve the gods? And his answer is a clear no. Since the essence, perfection, power, and principle of all good things are in the gods, the only genuine pursuit of good, from start to finish, is practiced by those connected to higher beings, truly embracing union with them.
So this is where true vision and intellectual knowledge are found, and self-reflection, self-knowledge naturally follow from knowing the gods first.
Exactly. So worrying about human opinions becomes irrelevant. Why would someone focus on the gods, care about mortal praise, and the fear that the soul might just stumble upon great things by chance? He dismisses that too. Where does real creation happen if not in true being? Imagination is in us, it makes illusions, but no illusion arises when intellectual life is fully active. Truth exists essentially in the intelligibles, not by agreement.
And those accusations against this are just calling them charlatans. He pushes back on that as well.
He points out, quite cleverly, that if fakes pop up alongside genuine seekers, just like bad work happens in any craft, these fakes are actually more opposed to true knowledge than anything else. Evil is always more contrary to good than to what's merely not good.
He then makes a really important distinction between divine providence and other lesser forms of predicting the future, like animal instinct or human reasoning.
Yes. Predictions from natural instinct, like animals sensing earthquakes, lack sacredness. They come from senses, sympathy, natural powers. Likewise, predictions from human reasoning or observing signs, like a doctor diagnosing a fever, are just human inference within the natural world. Even a natural human intuition about the future isn't truly blessed, because anything arising solely from nature in this realm of change can't be a genuine, perfect, eternal good.
Only divine theurgy, by truly connecting us to the gods, can transmit divine life, let us share in divine understanding and foreknowledge, and ultimately make us divine ourselves.
Precisely. Divine foreknowledge is inherently good, always tied to understanding the good, true order, what's fitting. It brings benefit, as the gods grant power to guard against natural evils. They hide the future when uncertainty builds virtue, but reveal it when knowing helps souls, embedding prophecy within their being.
So finally, what is the core, the essence of the path to eudaimonia, according to Iamblichus?
He explains that the intelligible, ideal human, originally united with the divine order, entered another soul tied to the human form. Through this, we became bound by necessity and fate. The solution, the liberation from these bonds, lies in the knowledge of the gods.
So eudaimonia is knowing the good.
Exactly. Just as evils come from forgetting the good and being deceived about evil, knowing the good is with the divine, ignorance and evil are tied to the mortal realm. True knowledge preserves real life by leading it back to the Father. Ignorance drags the changeable human down into constant flux.
This intellectual fulfillment, this divine union of the soul, is the primary path. But the theurgical path offers a unique gateway too.
Absolutely. It's a unique door, a place, a court of the good, leading straight to the Creator God. Its main power is as a vessel for the soul, far better than the physical body. Its effects follow. Preparing the intellect to see and share in the good, liberation from all opposites, and finally, union with the gods, the givers of good.
And the peak of this theurgical ascent connects the soul directly to parts of the cosmos and the divine powers flowing through them, ultimately entrusting the soul to the entire demiurge, placing it outside all totality, aligned only with the eternal logos, the divine reason.
That's the ultimate goal, the end of the Egyptian sacred ascent. Iamblichus finishes by defining the divine good as the preconceived God, existing before manifestation, and the human good as union with this God and understanding, he stresses, divinely transmitted in the Egyptian tradition. Theurgists don't bother the gods with trivial things, but focus on the soul's purity, liberation, salvation.
So we've really covered some ground here, from the transcendent one through the cosmos's architecture, the power of language, the nature of the daemon, and finally, eudaimonia as divine union. It's a vast and intricate tapestry of ideas.
It really is. And reflecting on these ancient views makes you wonder about their relevance today. How might these ideas about the divine and our place in the cosmos resonate with our own search for meaning, purpose, connection to something bigger?
Yeah, and in a world just saturated with information, constant noise, how do we cultivate that intellectual silence Iamblichus suggests is key to encountering the deepest truths, the ones beyond the everyday static? It's a question that definitely stays with you, invites more thought.
Absolutely.
We really encourage everyone listening to delve deeper into Iamblichus's demysterious and related Neoplatonic texts. This deep dive has just scratched the surface of a truly rich and rewarding exploration.
Welcome. Forget the fleeting scroll of headlines. Today, you're joining us for a deep immersion into something with the heft and enigma of ancient stone, the Hermetica.
Mm-hmm.
Picture this not as a dry lecture, but maybe more like an evening in a mytho-academic salon.
I like that.
Yeah, where we're swirling together, the sharpest scholarly insights with a bit of artistic alchemy, really, to illuminate these strange, sacred, and frankly intricate texts.
Precisely. And to really appreciate these writings, you almost need to conjure up the world that birthed them. We're talking ancient Egypt, but specifically during the Ptolemaic, Roman, and early Christian eras.
Right, this wasn't the Egypt frozen in, pyramid shell.
Yeah, no, this was a vibrant delta where Greek intellect mingled really deeply with Egyptian mysticism, a true cultural crucible.
Think about it. Alexander the Great arrives.
Right.
He sort of sets the stage.
Yeah.
Then comes that whole fascinating Ptolemaic dynasty, ending with Cleopatra, the famous one.
Right.
And then the long reach of Rome, followed by Byzantium. It's almost a millennium where, despite the shifting sands of power, there's this deep current of culture, of politics, that just persisted.
Absolutely. And it's right there in this unique Greco-Egyptian confluence that the Hermetica really began to, breathe.
And you can catch even earlier whispers, can't you? Like with Horus Sebenitos.
Oh, definitely. Back in the 2nd century BCE, around then, he was key in reforming the Ibis cult at Saqqara.
The Ibis cult, right. Thoth.
Exactly, Thoth. And what's remarkable is his direct connection to Thoth, who we often equate with Hermes, of course. He called him greatest and greatest god, great Hermes. It's like the first brushstroke, of that really powerful title, Trismegistus, that would later define Hermes.
Thrice great.
Thrice great. And Hor himself believed Thoth guided him through, the veiled language of dreams.
Dreams as a kind of divine script. That's a powerful metaphor, isn't it, for how we even approach these texts today.
It really is. And then there's Manetho, also from Sebenitos. He identified himself as a high priest, a scribe in Heliopolis.
Okay.
He wrote his History of Egypt in Greek. The goal was basically to showcase Egypt's, profound antiquity to the Hellenic world.
Make the case for Egypt's ancient wisdom.
Exactly. Now, his original work, it mostly survives in echoes, fragments quoted by later writers, but there's this Byzantine account linking him to an almost mythic task.
Which was?
Translating inscriptions left by not one, but two figures named Hermes.
Two.
Yeah. The first being Thoth himself, and the second, Hermes Trismegistus. And these inscriptions were, so the story goes, were etched onto stele and then recovered after a great flood.
That paints quite a picture, doesn't it? This lineage of wisdom stretching way back, rescued, translated.
It really does. It speaks to that fundamental human yearning, I think, to connect with foundational knowledge. And this really is our mission for this deep dive. We're not just, academics examining relics. We're trying to grasp the very genesis, the inherent character, and the enduring resonance of Hermetica, treating them as these, as you said, strange, sacred, intricate artifacts, just humming with the energies of their time.
So, for everyone joining us, be keen to navigate this ancient library without getting totally lost.
It's easy to do.
It is. Let's lay some groundwork. The Hermetica are, a wonderfully diverse collection of writings, all attributed to this figure, Hermes Trismegistus, a name that itself suggests a joint, a confluence. They're a fascinating blend of the practical think, astrology, alchemy, even magic spells, and the profoundly theoretical, things like theology, cosmology, humanity's place in it all, ethics, even a path to Well, self-realization.
Salvation.
Muskilmenos.
Gnosis.
Yeah, and it's worth noting scholars have debated for a long time how best to categorize this rich tapestry.
Yeah.
You had Scott famously distinguishing between the popular sort of occult strands and the more learned philosophical treatises.
Right, the two types. But then more recently, someone like Fowden argued, quite persuasively I think, that maybe these were all just threads woven from the same cultural loom.
That it wasn't such a clear divide.
Exactly. So for our exploration, it's probably useful to keep both perspectives in our mental toolkit as we delve deeper.
Okay, so let's start with those technical threads, those surprising bits that might spark the imagination. Clement of Alexandria, writing around, the turn of the 3rd century CE?
Yeah, about then.
He mentioned no fewer than 42 books of Hermes, held in high regard by Egyptian priests. 42.
It's a lot.
And intriguingly, he specifically points out 4 of these as the astrological books of Hermes. Imagine that. A whole priestly library section dedicated to the stars.
Well, it aligns beautifully with the rise of Greco-Egyptian astrology, which really started taking firm root as early as the 3rd century BCE.
Okay, so quite early.
Yeah. We see texts like the Summa Skeniaka. It's a Greek work likely composed in Alexandria, even though the title kind of hints at Babylonian origins. And it treated constellations not just as patterns of light, but as living divine entities, exerting their influence.
Wow. And then there are those handbooks attributed to figures like Hatshepsut and Pitosiris.
Right. Pitosiris, legend has it, got his astrological wisdom directly from Hermes himself.
Oh, directly.
Yeah, and he might actually have been a historical figure, maybe 4th century BCE. Their wisdom, or bits of it anyway, survive thanks to the Roman astrologer Vettius Valens, like echoes across time.
Echoes, yeah.
And what's captivating about these astrological hermetica is how deeply grounded they are in Egyptian cosmology. Take the Liber Hermetis. It's a Latin text, but its Greek roots probably go back to the 3rd century BCE.
Okay.
It delves into the really intricate system of the decans, that uniquely Egyptian way of dividing the zodiac into 36 segments.
Right, each with its own meaning.
Exactly, each saturated with its own complex astrological significance. And some texts got wonderfully specific, interpreting the meaning of thunder in different months or linking earthquakes to celestial movements. It's a cosmos alive with correspondences.
A vast web connecting heaven and earth, the macrocosm and the microcosm. And this system, it extended to healing too, right? These Iotra Mathematica.
Yes, the astrological medicine tracts. The very title suggests a kind of celestial diagnosis.
Right.
The book of Asclepius, called Myriagenesis, for instance, explored the human being as a miniature universe, a microcosm reflecting the grand macrocosm. And it teased out the medical implications of that connection. Even the properties of plants, minerals, viewed through this astrological lens.
Fascinating. Okay, so from stars to medicine, what about alchemy?
Alchemy. That really emerges in literary form in Egypt after about 200 BCE.
Yeah.
Primarily with writings attributed to Bolos Democritus of Mendes.
Bolos Democritus, okay.
Yeah. His work described these fundamental processes, things involving gold and silver, which became the absolute bedrock of later alchemical practices. You can almost picture the early alchemists in their workshops, right? Trying to unlock the secrets in these materials.
Yeah. And following Bolos, but still before the Christian era, you get this whole array of alchemical treatises circulating under names like Hermes, Agathodaimon, even Isis.
Mostly surviving as fragments, quoted in later texts, like whispers from forgotten laboratories, really.
Whispers, I like that.
But they reveal this rich allegorical world. There's this concept of crafting silver, the moon, by carefully heating and melting various substances.
Right.
And this almost organic idea that gold breeds gold, as if it has this vital generative force.
Gold breeds gold.
Interesting.
And it's particularly intriguing to see figures like Zosimus of Panopolis, around 300 CE. He was deeply engaged with both this Hermetic theosophy, the philosophical side, and the very practical aims of alchemy.
So he connects the two strands. He's a crucial link, yeah. Shows how these technical and learned aspects weren't always separate in the minds of the people studying them.
Okay. Now, for something really curious, the Quirinides.
Ah, yes, the Quirinides. Its prologue makes this bold claim that Hermes Trismegistus got the book directly from angels, like a divine gift.
From angels, wow.
Yeah. It claims to be a compilation of knowledge gathered by figures named Kronos and Harpocration, and it even hints at an old-time book, which was likely an early kind of bestiary. It feels like stumbling upon a secret grimoire.
So what's actually in it?
Well, what survives is remarkably systematic. The first book has 24 24 chapters, each keyed to a Greek letter, and it meticulously details a specific plant, bird, fish, or stone, along with its unique properties.
Like an encyclopedia of magical nature.
Sort of, yeah. And the later books follow a similar cataloging structure: quadrupeds, birds, fish, plants, stones again, often with a real focus on their medicinal and, well, magical uses.
And who actually wrote it? Not angels, presumably.
Probably not angels, no. While it's attributed to the celestial Hermes, scholarly detective work points towards our earthly friend Bolos Democritus as the more likely originator.
Bolos again. He gets around.
He certainly seems to have been influential. So you see this pattern, right? From the grand movements of stars down to the intimate properties of stones and plants.
There's this pervasive hermetic lens trying to decipher, even harness the hidden forces of nature.
Exactly. Which leads us naturally to that vast collection of the Greek and Demotic magical papyri, another rich trove that frequently invokes Hermes and his associated figures. Imagine finding these rolled up spells.
Potent with intention.
Absolutely. These papyri, they span from maybe the 2nd century BCE right up to the 5th century CE, and they are wonderfully pragmatic.
Pragmatic how?
Well, they're just brimming with spells for almost every human desire and fear you can imagine. Conjuring deities or demons to do your bidding.
Okay.
Inducing visions, divination, invisibility, love spells, protection spells, getting back stolen goods, even mundane stuff like curing gout or getting rid of pests.
So basically, life hack spells from antiquity.
Pretty much. People clearly had a wide range of needs and a correspondingly wide range of spirits they were willing to engage with.
And Hermes was a key figure in these.
Oh, absolutely. A go-to figure. There's this rather wonderfully direct, wondrous victory charm.
Victory charm.
Yeah, meant to be kept nestled in your sandals. A golden tablet inscribed with mystical symbols and the powerful name Thuth.
In your sandals.
In your sandals. All designed to bestow victory and strength with every single step.
That's brilliant. Anything more complex?
Oh, yeah. Consider this recipe for crafting a figure of Hermes to inspire creativity and insight.
Okay, what did that involve?
You'd need, 28 laurel leaves, virgin earth, wormwood seed, wheat meal, the herb called calf's snout, all ground together with liquid from an ibis egg.
Ibis egg, naturally.
Of course. Then molded into Hermes holding his herald's staff, timed perfectly to the waxing moon. Then a spell written on papyrus, or even a goose's windpipe.
A goose's windpipe.
Yes, inserted into the figure, which is placed at the feet of another Hermes image while you burn incense and recite the incantation. It's a whole ritualistic drama.
It's a far cry from abstract philosophy, isn't it?
Totally. Yet, even within these very practical spells, you can sometimes detect echoes of those broader cosmic themes we talked about.
How so?
Well, one surviving papyrus invokes Hermes with this cascade of titles. Titles connected to cosmology, language, justice, death, divination, healing. It even mentions Selene, the moon goddess, and lamps for the dead. It's this captivating fusion of the everyday and the profound.
Which provides a perfect segue, really, to the theoretical Hermetica. Those texts that maybe resonate more with that desire for aha moments, for a bigger picture.
Exactly. The Corpus Hermeticum, that collection of 17 Greek treatises, really shifts the focus towards theological and philosophical questions. Its core concern is acquiring knowledge, gnosis, as the path to self-salvation. Understanding reality, our place in it.
And it's important to remember, the Corpus Hermeticum isn't the only place for this theoretical stuff, right?
No, absolutely not. We also have the Latin Asclepius, those really illuminating excerpts preserved in Stobaeus' anthologies.
Stobaeus, right.
The Hermetica, discovered at Nag Hammadi, the Armenian definitions, the Vienna fragments. It's a diverse intellectual landscape, each offering a slightly different view.
But there's a common thread.
I think so. The central unifying thread woven through much of this theoretical work is that very concept, salvation through knowledge, gnosis. And it arose, remember, in a culture where the lines we draw now between religion and magic were much, much blurrier.
More porous.
Yeah, allowing for this fascinating interplay between the two.
And you can really see that interplay when you look closely, can't you? Like in Stobaeus' Excerpts of Six.
Absolutely. That one grapples with the details of astrology, the Egyptian decans.
The technical stuff.
Right. But it culminates with this assertion that someone who truly understands these celestial mechanics can understand God precisely and even see God with his own eyes, ultimately achieving blessedness.
So the technical becomes a path to the spiritual.
And precisely. The Hermetic authors clearly saw this technical knowledge not just as an end in itself, but as a potential conduit to really profound spiritual insight.
Okay, what else?
Well, consider excerpts XD5, XD6, and Stobaeus. They explore the soul's celestial origins, how our astrological and elemental makeup shapes our earthly life. Excerpt XD6 even gets into the concept of breath, atmos, and its vital link to the soul.
Breath, spirit.
Exactly. And when you recall that magical recipe for enumatosis, for inspiration, that link between breath, spirit, divine influence, it becomes really resonant.
And didn't the Kori Cosmo explicitly link philosophy and magic?
It did. That's another extensive excerpt in Stobaeus. It declares flat out that philosophy and magic may nourish the soul and medicine heal the body.
A holistic view.
Very much so. Where all these different kinds of knowledge, intellectual, practical, magical, contribute to this bigger quest for Gnostic salvation. Even magic could nourish the spirit.
Okay, but then you get those really startling passages in the Asclepius, the ones about making gods.
Ah, yes, the theurgy passages. They detail this process of manipulating material objects, specific plants, stones, spices, blending them to draw a divine power into a statue. Essentially, ensouling it.
Ensouling a statue,
It's a remarkably direct blurring of the lines between ritual action and, well, creating the sacred.
It's incredibly bold, which makes Zosimus's later critique of magic even more surprising, doesn't it?
It really does, because Zosimus, dismisses magic as ultimately insufficient for true spiritual enlightenment.
Even though he was an alchemist himself.
Right. He advocates instead for the critical importance of self-knowledge and a direct personal knowing of God.
So even within this Hermetic current, there wasn't total agreement on methods.
Not at all. It seems Zosimus, immersed in his alchemy, saw external magical rituals as maybe a blunt instrument compared to the transformative power of inner spiritual work.
Interesting distinction. Now, what about the Nag Hammadi find? The discourse on the 8th and 9th.
Ah, yes. Nag Hammadi Codex VI, Treatise 6. That adds another fascinating layer. It's widely seen as an initiatory text.
Initiatory how?
It focuses on the aspirant's journey towards achieving a state of godhood. How? Through the profound act of recognizing one's true divine nature and directly knowing God.
Which sounds similar to themes in the Corpus Hermeticum.
It definitely echoes themes found there, yes. But what's particularly striking is that even in this highly spiritual, almost mystical text, you find ritual passages.
Ritual even there.
Yep. There's a hymn full of mystical vowel sounds, and Hermes himself tells his son to write the book in hieroglyphs for the temple at Diospolis.
So that connection between esoteric knowledge and practical ritual persists.
It seems deeply embedded, even in the most theoretically focused texts.
So you have this contrast, right, between the Asclepius's more material god-making
with its recipes and ingredients,
and something like the Mithras liturgy in the magical papyri,
which is full of mystical sounds invoking elemental powers seeking immortal rebirth.
And then this discourse, aiming for godhood through inner knowing, but still including ritual elements, distinct approaches.
Definitely distinct approaches to engaging with the divine. Some much more overtly ritualistic and grounded in the material than others.
Okay, so this huge variety of texts, technical, theoretical, magical, how did they actually get passed down? What's the textual history?
Right, the transmission question. It's fascinating. We know the Byzantine scholar Michael Psellos back in the 11th century commented on the Corpus Hermeticum.
But he wasn't a fan.
Not exactly sympathetic, no. He basically called Hermes a wizard because he saw parallels or perceived parallels between these pagan texts and biblical stories, which he found problematic.
So his bias might have influenced things.
It's possible. His obvious dislike for magic might have even played a role in shaping which Hermetic texts got preserved and grouped together in the collection we now call the corpus.
That's a provocative thought, the selection process itself being biased. Okay, fast forward a few centuries.
To the 15th century, yes. Marsilio Ficino, his Latin translation of the first 14 treatises of the corpus, which he called Pimander, this was absolutely pivotal.
Why pivot?
Because the Renaissance was just exploding with interest in classical antiquity, helped along by the new printing press, and Ficino's translation was enthusiastically embraced.
And how did he frame Hermes?
He profoundly shaped the Western view, really, casting him as this venerable Egyptian sage, a contemporary of Moses, no less.
Wow, contemporary with Moses.
Yeah, and the originator of a Prisca Theologia, an ancient theology that supposedly flowed down through history right to Plato.
So the ultimate source of ancient wisdom.
Pretty much. Now, later thinkers tweaked this lineage, but that core image of Hermes as this primordial font of wisdom, it took deep root in the Western imagination.
And Ficino focused mainly on those first 14 treatises.
Initially, yes. Later Greek editions and commentaries did expand to include more of the Hermetic corpus, but the initial impact of that earlier, maybe slightly truncated version was huge. Perhaps it inadvertently helped create that perception of a more purely philosophical Hermetica, separate from the more overtly occult stuff. Interesting point. But even before Ficino, there were other views of Hermes floating around, weren't there?
Oh yes, the Suda, that 10th century Byzantine encyclopedia, portrays him quite differently. Not as a magician, but as this wise Egyptian who predated even the pharaohs.
Predated the pharaoh.
Yeah, and was even credited with understanding the Trinity. So there was already this established idea of Hermes as profoundly wise, even if people interpreted that wisdom differently.
Okay, so we have these different views. What about the Corpus Hermeticum itself as a collection? When did that come together?
That's the tricky part. We don't have solid evidence for it as a single unified collection before the 11th century, around Celsus's time.
But individual treatises were definitely floating around earlier.
Oh, for sure. Stobaeus included some in his anthology way back in the 5th century.
Right. And Cyril of Alexandria, also 5th century, knew some of the texts we have now, like CH Ace and 14, plus others that are now lost. He even mentioned a collection of 15 books attributed to Hermes.
15 books, so the idea of a collection was there earlier, even if our current corpus is a later compilation.
Exactly. Plus, the texts themselves sometimes refer to other Hermetic writings. And then the later discoveries, the Vienna fragments, the Nag Hammadi texts, they both predate Cellus and show these ideas were circulating more widely in various forms much earlier.
Okay. And were there other groups or people engaging with Hermetic ideas outside these main text collections?
Yes, absolutely. You have Bardesan of Edessa, a 2nd century Aramaic philosopher who seems to have grappled with Hermetic concepts.
Okay.
There's a Syriac collection of prophecies from around 600 CE that includes Hermes and even quotes from CH Third. And we absolutely cannot forget the Haranian Sabians.
The Sabians of Haran, right. Who were they again?
They were this fascinating pagan community in Haran, modern-day Turkey, who resisted both Christianity and Islam for centuries. And they adopted Hermes as their prophet, equating him with figures like Idris and Enoch.
So they kept our Hermetic tradition alive in a unique way.
A very unique way, yeah. Their intellectual tradition played a crucial role.
Which brings us nicely to the whole question of reception and influence. How did the Hermetica travel and impact different cultures?
Well, the Arab and Islamic world really embraced Hermes, especially in astrology, alchemy, and magic. Big names like Al-Kindi and Abu Mashar dug deep into Hermetic theology and astrology.
So he became an authority figure there too.
Hugely influential. Even in works supposedly by Aristotle, you find pseudo-Aristotelian texts claiming to pass down secret wisdom from Hermes via Aristotle to Alexander.
Wow.
And in alchemy, figures like Jabir ibn Hayyan, who became Geber in Latin, and Pseudo-Belinus, they constantly invoked Hermetic authority. Pseudo-Belinus is even linked to an early version of the famous Emerald Table.
The Emerald Table, the cornerstone text.
Absolutely, and don't forget the Picatrix, that infamous handbook of talismanic magic, heavily draws on Hermetic sources.
So a huge influence in the Islamic world. How did it get back to the Latin West?
Often through those Arabic translations, starting around the 12th century. The Liber Hermetis and the Asclepius were translated into Latin, sparking this new wave of curiosity.
And who picked up on it?
Thinkers connected to the school of Chartres, like Thierry and Bernardus. Also big names like Peter Abelard, Albertus Magnus. They all engaged with these texts.
But then Ficino's translation in the 15th century really blew things open in the Renaissance.
It really ignited the spark, yes. By framing Hermes as this ancient theologian, contemporary with Moses, predating Plato, he gave Hermetic ideas immense authority. That whole Prisca Theologia concept really resonated.
And the impact went beyond just philosophy.
Oh, far beyond. It influenced the arts, literature, even the early sciences. You see commentaries by Lefebvre d'Etaples, Francesco Giorgi, and then the more mystical, esoteric engagements by people like Giordano Bruno, Robert Flood.
Bruno and Flood, right.
The fascination, sometimes bordering on reverence, really peaked in the 17th century.
But then came the critique.
Then came Isaac Casaubon, early 17th century, a major turning point. He used meticulous linguistic and conceptual analysis.
Philology, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And he argued very compellingly that the Hermetica had to be much later texts. He pointed out biblical and Christian concepts within them, arguing they couldn't possibly be as ancient as everyone thought.
Undermining the whole Prisca Theology idea.
Completely dismantled it, really.
And that critique stuck.
It had a huge impact, especially in Protestant scholarship. People tried to defend the antiquity, but Casaubon's arguments largely won out. By the 18th century, that image of Hermes, the primeval sage, had really faded from mainstream intellectual history.
But the interest didn't completely die out.
Not entirely, no. Even someone like Isaac Newton, alongside his physics, kept a serious interest in Hermetic alchemy. Really. And then in the 19th century, you see this definite resurgence. Both scholarly interest, new translations, studies by Parthe, Menard, and theosophical interest, with figures from the Theosophical Society like Mead and Westcott getting involved.
Okay, bring us towards modern scholarship.
Exactly. Often marked by Richard Reitzenstein in the History of Religion School. Reitzenstein argued strongly for a significant Egyptian religious context for the Corpus Hermeticum,
which sparked debate.
Huge debate. You had Zielinski arguing for a primarily Greek context, Kroll emphasizing Hellenic philosophy and individual salvation, Busset looking at piety, maybe Babylonian influences. It was a really lively scholarly discussion.
And wasn't there an early influential translation that was later criticized?
Yes, Walter Scott's edition and translation from the early 20th century. Hugely influential for a while, but later seen as deeply flawed because he edited the text quite significantly.
Not ideal.
Not ideal for scholarship, no. The more rigorous Boudet edition by Nock and Festugère in the mid-20th century became the standard for decades. Though Festugère himself remained pretty skeptical about major Egyptian origins, he saw the Hermetica as maybe a bit incoherent, mostly scholastic.
But then came Nag Hammadi.
A game changer. These Coptic Hermetic texts directly challenged Festugère's purely Greek reading. They strongly suggested a much more substantial Egyptian contribution.
And who are the key figures bringing those to light?
Scholars like Jean Jaurès and Martin Krauss were crucial initially, revealing the texts and their significance.
And more recently?
Jean-Pierre Mahé's work has been really important in reestablishing a more credible Egyptian ancestry. He focused on things like the sentence form in some texts, connecting it back to ancient Egyptian wisdom literature.
Okay, and where does someone like Garth Fowden fit in?
Fowden's book, The Egyptian Hermes, offers this really sophisticated, nuanced perspective. He fully acknowledges the syncretism, the complex interplay of both Greek and Egyptian elements. It's not necessarily either.
A more integrated view.
Exactly. And we also have to mention Frances Yates. Her work on the Hermetic tradition in the Renaissance, while debated itself, was hugely influential in showing just how much impact these ideas had on early modern thought, regardless of the ongoing arguments about their ultimate origins.
So it's clear this deep dive has really only just, scratched the surface of this incredibly rich, multifaceted world of the Hermetica.
Absolutely. These texts, born from this unique cultural confluence, they've been on this long, winding journey through history, sparking debate, inspiring art and literature, influencing major thinkers for millennia. And as we reflect on this complex tapestry woven from Egyptian threads, Greek philosophy, maybe other ancient traditions too, and think about its varied reception across all these different times and places, one big question kind of emerges, doesn't it?
Which is?
Well, given this profound example of cultural cross-pollination, the syncretism, and the enduring human fascination with these strange and sacred texts, what might the Hermetica actually reveal about the nature of syncretism itself, and about that timeless human quest to understand our place in the cosmos, to connect with something bigger?
How do these ancient writings, so enigmatic but also so resonant, still speak to our contemporary search for meaning in our own complex world?
Exactly. It's a question that feels like it could invite a lifetime of further exploration, really. Imagine, if you will, holding something like a whisper, pressed between layers of time almost, a fragment rescued from mummy cartonnage, incredibly.
Right, from that sort of ancient papier-mâché.
Exactly. It's this tangible echo from the Augustan age. And today, we're tracing its voice, diving deep into the Berlin papyrus in Furrow 21243.
Unearthed in Egypt, nearly 2,000 years old.
And it's not just, ink on brittle fiber, is it?
No, not at all. Think of it more like a portable mural almost. A pretty substantial sheet with these columns of text.
And they vary in width, don't they?
They do, like different movements in some forgotten piece of music. And you can see the margins, they're quite deliberate. The spacing too, and even a collisus.
The seam where the sheets join.
Exactly. It tells us something about how it was made. that it was intentional, part of maybe a larger role or even a codex. It carries weight.
Precisely. And this isn't some everyday ledgers, is it? It's this collection of, well, potent desires, anxieties too. It's supplementum magicum too.
A book of charms.
Holding the very formulas people back then believed could, I don't know, shape their destinies. It's like a direct line, isn't it, across all that time?
It really is a profoundly intimate glimpse. And what a mix of intentions.
Right.
You start with this preface, sort of laying out where these epodes, these charms, supposedly come from.
An origin story for the magic?
Kind of, yeah. Then you get these love spells, several of them using different techniques, the apple.
Yes, the apple.
Incantations, ritual actions, references to myths, all woven together.
And then, almost like an afterthought, but maybe not, a charm for a headache.
The most universal problem.
Yeah.
The term epodes, by the way, just refers to these spoken charms, these incantations, believed to be, particularly effective.
It's that mix that gets me. The huge cosmic yearning for love right next to a headache. And the preface claims Egyptian origins, but the language itself, it's Greek.
That's the fascinating part. It's this beautiful, complex hybrid. Shows how ideas and cultures just flowed back then.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if you look closely at the script itself...
Yeah, there are little clues. The ethicist, those marks emphasizing certain bits.
Like underlining, almost.
Sort of, yeah. Or bigger initial letters, starting a new spell. Abbreviations, too. Compressed forms. And even some inconsistencies, like the iota add script, sometimes being there, sometimes not.
Which tells us about how it was copied, maybe. Passed down.
Exactly. They're not just random mistakes. They're like little whispers about the text's own journey. The ethicist really spotlights key words or instructions.
Okay, so let's start where the text starts. That preface, that declaration of origin, it sets a powerful stage.
It really does. These charms, it says, weren't just made up. They were excerpted.
And that word, exagage, it sounds quite deliberate, like they were carefully selected.
Yeah, the ambiguity is interesting. It implies they're not new, but chosen pieces, drawn from something older, something foundational. And
the foundation they claim is, well, pretty grand. A sacred book from Heliopolis.
The city of the sun, radiant, ancient.
Attributed to Hermes himself.
No less. And not just anywhere, but found in the innermost shrine.
Wow.
Written originally in Egyptian letters, it claims, and then translated into Greek.
The sheer weight of that claimed lineage. It's like saying, this isn't just magic, this is ancient wisdom.
That's precisely the move. It taps into that immense respect for Egyptian knowledge at the time, linking it to Hermes.
Who gets tangled up with Thoth, right?
Exactly, the Egyptian god of writing, magic, knowledge. So they're grounding these spells in this incredibly old divine authority. It gives them serious gravitas.
That Hermes-Thoth connection, that syncretism, would have really meant something to people seeking magical power, wouldn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Suggesting this unified ancient source. It's like saying, these aren't just my words, they're echoes of divine understanding.
Okay, so after that big claim, we get the first practical bit of magic. The charm by means of an apple.
Yeah, there's a lovely simplicity there. Tangible.
The humble apple.
Elevated, yeah. And the instruction is clear. Say the incantation 3 times.
And the incantation itself.
It's in hexameter, that sort of epic verse style. I shall throw apples. I shall give this always timely love spell to eat both for mortal people and immortal gods.
There's a question mark there. Uncertainty.
Some textual uncertainty, yeah. But the gesture is expansive, offering the apple and the love it represents to everyone, mortals and gods alike.
And the effect is meant to be instant, almost physical. Whether the person gets the apple, throws it away,
or gets hit by it.
Right, or eats it, or holds it close, bam, they fall madly in love.
It engages the senses, doesn't it? The physical act is tied directly to the spoken word, sympathetic resonance.
Touching the apple becomes the conduit.
Exactly. A physical channel for the practitioner's will. And then comes the call to Cyprogenia.
Aphrodite, born in Cyprus.
The goddess of love herself, asked to fulfill this charm completely, just whims this supposedly Egyptian practice right into Greek love magic traditions.
And the commentary points out those Greek connections, right? Like Theocritus, Menander. The apple as a love token is already there.
Yeah, it highlights those parallels. So even in this spell claiming Egyptian roots, you see this cultural back and forth.
A dialogue between traditions.
It's like the person using the spell is drawing power from multiple sources, trying to amplify the effect.
Okay, but then the next love charm, it takes a very different turn. Much darker, maybe.
Feels much more primal, yeah. Less gentle offering, more forceful.
The speaker just declares, I have taken your eye, your soul, tasted your blood, used to devour your liver, your skin, I have done it. It's intense.
That repetition, too, NN says, feels like this rhythmic binding, a litany of possession.
A claiming. The commentary mentions a diakopos.
Right, a spell maybe to break up a rival relationship. That's one possibility.
For our listeners, a diakopos is like a separation spell, basically.
Yeah, causing discord. Or it could be even more unsettling, maybe representing some kind of ritual coercion or attempted possession. The language is just so invasive, violent almost.
A huge shift from the apple.
Definitely. And then, right in the middle of all that, you get this mythic bit. The goddess in heaven looked down upon him, and everything happened according to the wish of his soul.
Which goddess, does it say?
It doesn't explicitly say. The commentary suggests maybe Isis, which would connect back to the Egyptian theme from the start,
Provides an anchor.
but leaving her unnamed.
Yeah.
Maybe that gives it a broader power, allows the user to project their own divine understanding onto her.
Interesting. And then there's the time element. From the day and from the hour of standing, falling in love, friendship, and affection until I die.
Yeah, that uncertainty around standing or falling, it feels very human, doesn't it? The unpredictable nature of love creeping into the spell itself.
And it ends with another plea, this time specifically to Lady Goddess Isis.
Yeah.
Even with the Greek spelling, to fulfill this charm completely.
Again, grounding it in that Egyptian framework, but using the Hellenized name, it's that constant weaving together.
It really shows a world where these cultural lines were just blurry. People mixed and matched beliefs.
Absolutely. They used what they thought would work, drawing from different traditions. Which brings us to the next love charm, another shift. This one feels more performative, celestial.
Yes, the ritual aspect is really highlighted. Having raised the hands toward the stars, move them, saying.
It's not just words anymore. It's gesture, aligning your body with the cosmos. And then perfume comes in.
Perfume.
Using fragrant oils in love magic has a long history, as the commentary notes.
Yeah.
You see it in Assyrian magic, demonic texts too.
And here it's not just nice smelling stuff.
No, it's imbued with myth. It becomes a vehicle for sacred power.
The incantation links it right to Isis and Osiris, doesn't it?
It does. You are the perfume with which Isis anointed herself when she went to the bosom of Osiris, her husband and brother, and you gave charm to her on that day.
Wow. Using that core myth, that ultimate love story as the model, the perfume is meant to channel that power.
And that specific myth, the commentary points out, goes way back. Pyramid text, Plutarch wrote about it. It's a deeply embedded story being actively used here.
For a very personal goal. Give me him, NN, or her, NN. Just a simple plea, really, against this huge mythic backdrop.
Then the tone just plunges.
It really does. The call to Helios, the sun god, and all the gods rising with him, it starts broad, asking for good looks, wealth.
But then zooms right in, laser focused on him and N.
And that's where you hear this raw voice coming through. He does not remain, I am running, and he flees from me.
The commentary really emphasizes how rare it is to find that kind of raw, personal desperation in these formal spell texts.
It's like a crack opens up, and you see the actual person, their pain.
It's quite affecting, really. That frustration just bleeds through.
And then from that desperation, it shifts again to coercion, threats almost.
Yeah, invoking cosmic disruption, neither of rising nor of setting, for the sun or stars. Laying down prohibitions.
May he not drink nor sit down nor eat.
And then the explicit threat. I shall torture you until you come to me.
Torture, that's strong language.
Very. The Greek word is basanizo. The commentary links this kind of forceful language to defictiones.
Those cursed tablets we mentioned, often on lead.
Exactly. And also to Coptic magic. It shows the darker side, the willingness to use force, even divine force, to get what you want.
A stark reminder. Yet even after that outburst, it loops back, doesn't it?
It does. It ends with that familiar call to, O lady goddess born in Cyprus, Aphrodite again, to fulfill this charm completely.
So even in that desperate, angry moment, they return to the goddess of love.
It's a fascinating cycle. Shows the complexity of desire and the different tools people used, which leads us away from love spells finally to the headache charm.
Right. It almost feels mundane after all that intensity, but it's just as revealing, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It shows the sheer breadth of what magic was supposed to cover. Grand passions, yes, but also just everyday aches and pains.
So this one works by sympathy, right? Like effects like...
That's the principle. It describes Osiris, Ammon, and Senevthus, big Egyptian gods, as also suffering from headaches.
Osiris in his head, Ammon in his temples.
Senevthus all over. And the implied threat is, well, Audacious.
Their divine headache won't stop until the human's headache stops. Until first, he, NN, starts completely.
Exactly. The idea that the gods are somehow compelled by this person's headache. The commentary notes this is seen in demonic spells too. Divine suffering forces action.
It's a bold move, basically saying, make my headache stop, or these gods keep suffering.
A pretty potent framing for asking for relief.
Oh, okay, and finally, there are just fragments left over too. Little glimpses.
Yeah, tantalizing bits. Fragment 1 hints at maybe unrequited love, or maybe ending love. I do not love him.
Fits with the themes we've seen.
Fragment 3 mentions Helios again, linking back to those solar invocations, the power of the sun. And Fragment 5 might mention Day, Hemra, reminding us how specific times were often important in spells, trying to catch the right moment.
So when you put it all together, the complete spells, the fragments, the preface, you get this incredible snapshot, don't you?
You really do. Life in the Augustan Age, where magic wasn't separate, it was woven into dealing with love, health, everything.
And the cultural blending is just everywhere.
Absolutely. Claims Egyptian roots, written in Greek, calls on Egyptian gods, Greek gods. It's a testament to how interconnected that world was.
Yeah.
Syncretism in action.
So it leaves you thinking. You look at these spells, that deep yearning for love, sometimes that sheer desperation invoking gods for a headache. How different really are the fundamental human anxieties, the deep desires we deal with today, from what someone etched onto this papyrus almost 2,000 years ago?
That's the question, isn't it? Does the core human experience change all that much underneath it all? A question that echoes long after you stop reading. You know that feeling, that little thrill, the sense that maybe there's more going on, like a hidden structure beneath everything, figures whispering from history's corners, shaping things in ways we don't quite grasp.
Like finding hidden layers in an old painting. You see the surface, but you know there's something underneath.
Exactly. Have you ever paused, maybe while you're deep in the archives or sketching out an idea or tracing some complex academic lineage, and just wondered about those enigmatic figures who somehow persisted through centuries?
It's like discovering a palimpsest, isn't it? Layer upon layer of meaning, each era writing its own story onto an older one, hinting at something original but distant.
Precisely. And today on The Deep Dive, we're doing just that kind of digging. You've brought us this amazing collection of sources, and our job really, as fellow seekers of, well, complexity, is to pull out the most fascinating bits just for you.
And our subject today, this elusive figure, Hermes Trismegistus, well, he promises a particularly rich exploration. He's less a single person, as we'll see, and more a powerful symbol, casting this incredibly long shadow.
Hermes Trismegistus, the name itself just sounds ancient, arcane, doesn't it? Like a secret whisper down the ages. So using your sources, we're going to try and trace this spectral figure and the huge body of work linked to him, right from antiquity up to now.
And it's probably important to say right up front that Hermeticism, the ideas around this name, it isn't some neat little package. It's much more like a sprawling river delta of thought, constantly shifting, reflecting different intellectual landscapes over time.
Okay, delta. Let's try and map it a bit. Your sources really highlight this point. Trying to rigidly define Hermeticism is like trying to bottle moonlight. It just changes when you try to contain it.
Right. It's been seen as, well, the ancestor of alchemy, a philosophy based on cosmic connections, the bedrock of Renaissance thinking, even as a catch-all for anything esoteric or occult.
And some even see it as something deeper, maybe a fundamental human urge to connect with the divine, like a constant spiritual pattern.
And that's what's so captivating, isn't it? The shape-shifting quality. If you try to lock it down, we risk losing what made it so appealing in the first place.
Right. So our plan then is to follow the story of Hermes Trismegistus through time. We'll look at texts carrying his name, sure, but also those that just sort of invoke his authority implicitly.
And hopefully answer some key questions. What does this figure really represent? Why has he had such lasting appeal? And, why do people keep citing these texts, reimagining them in so many different ways?
Along the way, we'll see Hermeticism viewed through all sorts of lenses: alchemy, Renaissance philosophy, various esoteric traditions. We might even touch on it as maybe a kind of fundamental human archetype or a basic spiritual template.
Think of it as our own little mytho-academic salon, just for you. We'll aim for scholarly care, definitely, but let's not be afraid of a bit of metaphorical language, the oddness of it all, maybe even some playful absurdity.
I like that. Approaching it as something strange, sacred, intricate, which feels right for someone like you who values depth and nuance, whether you're archiving, creating art, or deep in academic research. So where do we possibly start with this enigma?
Well, the most logical place, according to the sources, is right at the beginning. His mythical origins is the foundation for everything that follows. And the first big thing to grasp is that Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great sage, he never actually existed as one single person.
Ah, the big reveal. So the legend is a construct, a kind of composite. Okay, so if he wasn't one person, what or who is he made of?
He comes out of this really fascinating cultural blend in Hellenistic Egypt, after Alexander the Great's conquest around 332 BCE. It's basically a fusion of two major gods, the Egyptian god Thoth and the Greek god Hermes.
Thoth and Hermes. Okay, two heavyweights from their respective pantheons. Let's unpack them a bit individually first. What was Thoth all about?
Thoth was absolutely central in Egypt, revered way back to the Old Kingdom, usually shown with an ibis head, right? His main cult center was Hermopolis Magna, a name the Greeks gave him, telling in itself. Mythologically, he was credited with inventing tons of cultural stuff. He was the divine judge in the story of Egypt's founding, sorting out the mess between Horus and Seth.
So right from the start, he's tied to establishing order, validating power.
Exactly. But maybe even more crucial for our story, Thoth was seen as the inventor of writing and mathematics. And for the Egyptians, this wasn't just practical skill, writing, documenting rituals properly. It was about establishing the legitimacy, the permanence of their whole civilization, recording the eternal order almost. He was the god of wisdom, administration, the patron of scribes, kind of the ultimate divine archivist.
The celestial bureaucrat. Okay, but he was more than just a record keeper, wasn't he?
Oh, definitely. He had huge cosmological importance too, a moon god, representing the sun god at night. In the Ptolemaic era especially, he was linked to regulating the moon's phases, the stars' movements. A cosmic map maker, you could say. And we can't forget his magic. Thoth was called Great of Magic, a powerful force against chaos.
Okay, Thoth. Wisdom, writing, cosmic order, potent magic. A pretty full portfolio. Now what about Hermes, his Greek counterpart?
Homer paints Hermes as the helpful messenger of the gods, right? Zipping between worlds, facilitating communication. He was linked to fertility, herds, pastures, gymnastics, and importantly, persuasive speech oratory. Patron of commerce, trade. Some merchants loved him. But he also had that darker, trickster side god of thieves.
A bit of a double agent then, respectable and sneaky.
Exactly, that duality is key. And like Thoth, Hermes guided souls to the underworld, a psychopomp. But he also famously led Persephone back from the dead, showing his ability to cross boundaries. And crucially, he had magic too. Think of Hades' helmet for invisibility, or the plant he gave Odysseus against Circe. His famous caduceus, the wand, could put people to sleep or wake them up. He was seen as incredibly resourceful, richest in gifts, good for both honest success and clever cheating.
Right, so we've got Thoth, the Egyptian god of deep wisdom and cosmic structure, and Hermes, the quick Greek messenger, good and tricky, both linked to magic and guiding souls. It almost feels inevitable they'd merge, sharing those overlaps.
And it seems they did, even before full-blown Hellenistic syncretism kicked in. Herodotus, back in the 5th century BCE, noted they were seen as similar trickster types with magic, messengers, guides for the dead. The groundwork was already there.
And this merger leads to Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great. That title pops up around the 2nd century BCE. What's the significance of thrice great?
It probably reflects his combined power, drawing authority from two already major deities. It just emphasizes his exceptional status, the vastness of his knowledge and abilities. And this combined figure, as Diodorus Siculus tells it, ended up being credited with an absolutely staggering range of functions.
Okay, lay it on us. What was this thrice great sage supposedly responsible for?
Well, according to Diodorus, Hermes Trismegistus perfected language itself, named things that didn't have names, invented the alphabet, the absolute foundation of recorded thought, and set up the core rituals for worshiping the gods. He supposedly figured out the order of the stars, the harmonies in music, founded wrestling schools, taught the Greeks eloquence, Hermenia, a nice nod to his Greek side. He was even called the sacred scribe of Osiris, the one Osiris trusted completely.
Wow, that's everything. From basic naming to cosmic mechanics, language, religion, science, sports. He's like the ultimate ancient polymath, a Renaissance man before the Renaissance.
Exactly. In these stories, he often seems quite human-like, living among people as their teacher. This lord of reason and rational speech, the ancestor of all wisdom, philosophy, theology. The Egyptians supposedly even claimed he taught figures like Democritus, Plato, and Pythagoras.
Okay, so initially, he seems like this divine figure, the all-knowing sage. But then you mentioned the lines blur a bit. Was he always seen as a god or a prophet or just a really wise human?
And that ambiguity, that sort of shimmering uncertainty about his exact nature, is really key to his whole mystique. For some, he was clearly divine, like his parent gods. Others saw him as a prophet, channeling divine truths. And others viewed him as an exceptionally enlightened human sage, someone who'd reached incredible wisdom through study, maybe with divine help. The figure himself seems almost intentionally fluid, adaptable.
Like he was designed to fit into different belief systems, different needs, and it wasn't even clear if there was just one Hermes Trismegistus, right? The sources hint at more than one.
Indeed. There's a text linked to the Egyptian priest Menetho that talks about two distinct Hermeses. The first was Thoth himself, writing stuff down in hieroglyphs before the biblical flood. The second lived after the flood and had the job of translating that ancient wisdom into Greek and storing it in temples. Cicero went even further, claiming there were 5 different gods called Hermes, with Trismegistus being the most recent.
5 Hermeses, like a dynasty of wisdom keepers passing the torch.
Mm-hmm.
So, given this fluid identity, these multiple versions, how do we even start defining the huge body of work linked to him? What actually counts as a Hermetic text?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Especially since, as we've said, Hermes Trismegistus didn't personally write these things in the way we think of authorship. They're pseudepigraphic texts written in his name to give them authority. So how do you decide what belongs in the Hermetic corpus?
Well, I suppose one way could be to look for common themes, shared ideas, and say anything with those features is Hermetic. But that assumes we already know what Hermeticism is, and we've just said that's slippery.
Right. The approach your sources favor, and the one we'll use, is to include basically all texts that either explicitly claim Hermes Trismegistus as author or implicitly seem to draw their authority from him.
Okay, so focusing on the attribution, the claim of authorship, rather than just thematic similarity, what's the benefit of doing it that way?
It lets us trace the legacy of this wise old Egyptian idea over time. We can see how his significance changed, how the literature using his name grew. It also avoids the trap of deciding up front what's real Hermeticism and then dismissing later stuff as fake. I mean, with a fundamentally fictional author, the whole idea of forgery gets a bit fuzzy anyway.
That makes a lot of sense. It shifts the focus from historical authorship to the ongoing tradition of appealing to this powerful symbol. It's almost like how ancient poets invoked the muses for inspiration, isn't it?
Exactly. It's a similar model. The writer wasn't necessarily claiming sole credit, but positioning themselves as a channel for knowledge believed to come from a divine source, inspired by Hermes Trismegistus. The emphasis was on faithfully passing down ancient sacred wisdom, not on individual invention.
So for the people writing or reading these texts, calling something Hermetic was like putting up a flag, signaling a certain philosophical viewpoint or a claim to ancient authority, not necessarily about proving a direct historical link.
Precisely. As Heinrich Noll noted way back in the 17th century, he called his own science Hermetic, partly because it followed a kind of secret method he saw hinted at in texts like the Tabulus Maragdina. So the name itself acts like a discourse marker, signaling a specific approach.
And it's interesting that the question of whether Hermes actually existed only really became a big deal much later, like in the 17th century. In antiquity, it was the symbolic power of the name that mattered most.
Exactly. Even someone like Iamblichus, writing in late antiquity, suggested the texts under Hermes' name were translations of Egyptian teachings done by Greek speakers. He was still emphasizing the Egyptian origin of the wisdom, even if the authorship was indirect. The key thing was tapping into this timeless divine knowledge, not modern ideas about copyright.
All right, so we've got the mythical origins sorted and a handle on how tricky it is to define the texts. Let's dive into the writings themselves. What do these Hermetic texts from late antiquity actually look like? What's in them?
Well, on the surface, the Hermetica look like a real mixed bag. You've got these deep theological and philosophical texts exploring God and the cosmos, sitting alongside more practical stuff, magic, astrology, alchemy. Clement of Alexandria around 200 CE gives us an early snapshot. He mentions 36 philosophical books of Hermes being carried in an Egyptian procession, plus 6 medical texts. Though other sources, like those linked to Manetho or Seleucus, mention much, much larger numbers, probably legendary figures.
36 philosophical books. That's still a decent library, even if not thousands. And you mentioned this mix of traditions. How did that syncretism, that blending happen?
Well, both the figure of Hermes Trismegistus himself and the writings tied to him are really products of Hellenistic philosophy of nature. It was this incredible melting pot where you had Aristotelian, Platonic, Stoic, Pythagorean ideas, all mixing together with Egyptian, Jewish, and maybe even Iranian religious and philosophical themes. Trying to neatly pick apart exactly where each idea came from is, well, it's almost impossible. The whole intellectual atmosphere was about intense cross-pollination.
Sounds like a real marketplace of ideas. That quote from Emperor Hadrian about 2nd century Egypt, where worshippers of Serapis are also Christians, and everyone's into astrology and fortune-telling, really captures that vibe, doesn't it? So, in this fertile ground, what are the main types of Hermetic texts that emerged?
We can group them broadly. First, there's the Corpus Hermeticum, often just called the CH. It's a collection of 18 Greek treatises, mostly dating from the 1st, 4th centuries CE, though the collection as we have it was put together later, in the Byzantine era. But smaller collections of these texts were definitely circulating earlier. And interestingly, some texts seem to refer to each other, hinting maybe at a collaborative effort, a school of thought perhaps.
Right, so maybe not just one lone sage, but a group working together.
That seems quite likely. Second, we have the Asclepius. This probably dates to the 2nd or 3rd century CE. We mostly have it in a Latin translation, but there are important Greek and Coptic fragments too, some found at Nag Hammadi. It was even mistakenly thought to be by Apuleius for a while, and St. Augustine quotes it, which shows it was circulating fairly widely, fairly early on.
A text with its own interesting history of transmission. What else makes up this Hermetic library?
Well, there's the anthology put together by John Strazarus in the 5th century for his son. It contains really substantial chunks of various Hermetic texts, which is incredibly valuable. And then, of course, the massive discovery in 1945, the Nag Hammadi Library in Egypt. That gave us 5 Hermetic texts in Coptic translation, including 2 completely new ones. That really changed the game for scholars.
That must have been a huge moment finding those texts.
Absolutely transformative. Beyond those big collections, we also find fragments quoted by early church fathers like Tertullian, Lactantius, Augustine, often when they were arguing against pagan ideas. Then there are the Hermetic definitions, which survive in a 6th century Armenian translation from Greek. And finally, bits and pieces still turn up papyrus fragments found in excavations or old library collections.
It's like assembling a mosaic from scattered pieces across different languages and formats. Now, you mentioned earlier a difference between the philosophical, theological texts and the technical ones. Can you explain that distinction?
Sure. The philosophical, theological ones, like in the Corpus Hermeticum or the Asclepius, they're grappling with the big questions. What is God? What's the nature of the universe? What's humanity's place and purpose? How do we achieve spiritual knowledge? The technical Hermetica, and we prefer that term now over older ones like popular or vulgar, which sound a bit dismissive, they focus more on practical applications of this hidden knowledge. Think astrology, magic, alchemy.
Okay, so one stream is about the grand principles, the other is about how to use those principles in the real world. Can you give some examples of the technical text?
Definitely. There's the book on the 36 Deacons, which is a detailed astrological work, parts of which might go back to the 1st century BCE. Hermes pops up constantly as an authority figure in the Greek magical papyri, being invoked for all sorts of things: prophecy, love spells, cursing enemies, finding thieves. He's also key in the Serenity, a text full of magical remedies based on cosmic sympathies. And of course, he's hugely important as a founding father of alchemy. Early alchemists like Zosimus of Panopolis explicitly named him as a major source and authority.
It's an incredibly wide range of activities, all under one name. So even back then, the Hermetica wasn't one single thing. It was this sprawling collection, hard to pin down. Which brings us back to the big question. Despite all this diversity, is there some common thread, a core essence to ancient Hermeticism?
That really is the central puzzle, isn't it? As one scholar famously put it, Hermeticism can feel like a thing without corners and edges, hard to grasp. But somehow, all this diverse stuff was passed down under Hermes Trismegistus's name. So let's try and tease out some of the main theological and philosophical ideas that seem to run through many of these texts, maybe starting with the Poimander, which is often seen as foundational.
Poimander, right, often considered the keystone of the Corpus Hermeticum. What's the core idea in that text?
Well, Poimander, the very first treatise in the CH, it sets up this powerful story of mystical revelation. The narrator meets Poimander, who's usually understood as the divine mind, the nous, the cosmic intellect, and Poimander reveals the basic truth about nature, the universe, and humanity's place in it all. And it ends with a kind of mission. The narrator has to go out and spread this wisdom.
So it moves from this direct, maybe inexpressible, mystical insight to a more structured explanation, and then to a call to teach others, like
Yeah.
a three-step process of divine communication.
Exactly. The initial raw truth of the vision gets translated, you could say, into Poimander's logos, his rational explanation, making it understandable. And then Hermes takes on the job of preaching it, sharing this knowledge, though often maybe with a select group.
And what are the main ideas about the cosmos revealed in Poimander? What kind of universe does it describe?
The cosmos is seen as coming from this dynamic tension between two basic opposing principles. You've got matter associated with darkness, chaos, a kind of damp nature, and then you've got light, which is the ordering principle identified with God or the divine spirit. The world and humanity itself arise from the combination of these two.
So a kind of cosmic dualism, light versus dark, order versus chaos, like a universal yin and yang.
That's a good way to think about it. Although God is transcendent, pure spirit, beyond matter, he's also seen as omnipresent, extending his influence into matter through the logos, giving form and structure to everything. The creation story in Poimander talks about God working through two suns, the noetic spirit, which is like the ideal blueprint for the cosmos, and the incorporeal proto-human, the original archetype for humanity. These spiritual templates, these idea, they act as the ordering principles for the visible world.
So God doesn't get his hands dirty directly, but works through these divine intermediaries, these perfect spiritual models. And how is this created world structured?
The visible cosmos is governed by the 7 planetary spheres, all operating under the influence of fate or Heimermene. These spheres, set in motion by the divine spirit, bring forth living creatures, but the creatures themselves are seen as lacking inherent spirit. This sets up a hierarchy. Lower things are more caught up in matter, further from the logos, while higher, more spiritual beings are closer to God.
And where do humans fit into this cosmic ladder?
Poimander's anthropology is totally tied into this cosmology. God creates humanity like himself, based on that original spiritual model. This ideal human archetype got specific powers from the stars. So earthly humans, us, we're understood as dual beings, mortal because of our physical bodies, but immortal because of our connection to the spiritual realm. These two parts, body and spirit, aren't necessarily enemies. They're complementary, united by love. Interestingly, it also talks about an original hermaphroditic human, which later split into sexes with the command to reproduce.
So we're both earthly creatures and divine sparks, subject to fate, but with an immortal core. What are the ethical consequences of this dual nature, according to Poimander?
The main ethical job is to recognize this dual nature and act accordingly. By understanding our spiritual essence, our link to the Creator, we can start to detach from purely physical drives. The ultimate aim is to transcend the body, ascend through the celestial spheres, sort of shutting the lower parts of the soul back to the planets they came from, and finally merge with God in the 8th sphere described as the blessed goal to become divine.
Wow, so it's a path of self-knowledge leading to spiritual liberation and reunion with the divine source. And you mentioned the Asclepius built on these ideas.
Yes, the Asclepius, probably from the 2nd or 3rd century CE, it really emphasizes this connection between different kinds of knowledge. True self-knowledge requires understanding nature, which in turn leads to theology, because God is the underlying principle of nature. The big concept here is hen kai pan, one and all. It's a very pantheistic idea. Even God is one and all. This unity that permeates everything.
So everything's connected, and individual things are just temporary expressions of this universal one.
Exactly. Individuals don't have an independent, eternal essence. They're immortal only as part of the species, the flow. But humanity gets a special status within this oneness. Hermes calls humans a great wonder, worthy of worship precisely because of our dual nature, that mix of spirit and body.
Part of the whole, yet uniquely special within it, what's our specific job or role, according to the Asclepius?
We have a dual destiny. Cultivate the earth, engage with the material world, but also pursue knowledge of God and nature, using our spiritual and intellectual gifts. Our spirit, which comes from the quinta essentia, the 5th element, gives us freedom and dignity, lifting us above purely material things that are more subject to fate. But, and this is important, emphasizing spirit doesn't mean hating the body. We're called the 3rd God, responsible for caring for the 2nd God, which is the cosmos. Our body isn't a flaw, it's how we interact with the world.
So we're caretakers of creation using our bodies, and celebrants of the divine order using our souls. A big responsibility.
It is, and that responsibility can feel like a burden, leading to this spiritual longing to be freed from the body through death and ascend back to the spiritual realm. The Asclepius also includes this quite dramatic apocalyptic vision, a warning about what happens when human spirit turns away from piety. The gods abandon Egypt, a symbol of order. Chaos reigns, the Nile floods wrong, stars go haywire. It really drives home the idea that cosmic order depends on humans acting wisely and piously.
So even with this strong spiritual focus, the material world isn't demonized in the Asclepius like it is in some other contemporary systems, say Gnosticism.
That's a really crucial point. While divine spirit and dark matter are seen as opposites, the body itself isn't inherently bad or evil. Even sex for procreation is seen positively as reflecting divine creation. But spirit must remain primary, ensuring our freedom, dignity, and potential for ascent. Now, shifting gears a bit, the Nag Hammadi find brought some unique perspectives, didn't it? Let's look at the Ogdode reveals the Enya.
The Ogdode reveals the title itself sounds like secret knowledge being unveiled, step by step. What's the main focus of this text?
It really digs into what's required to achieve true mystical vision, laying out a kind of spiritual climb towards knowing God. It strongly emphasizes that this isn't just about learning stuff. It requires serious, intellectual, and importantly, moral preparation. You have to distance yourself from the world, free yourself from base physical urges, practice piety, live by God's laws.
So it's not just reading the right books. You need a real inner transformation to even get a glimpse of higher truth.
Exactly. Only those who truly revere God and live piously can hope to be lifted into the Ogdode, the realm of higher divine powers, which is the step needed to gain true wisdom. The text itself includes this powerful prayer invoking God, using what looks like a magical name, followed by Hermes asking God for wisdom and for God to recognize the pneuma, the spirit, in him and his disciple, accepting their spiritual offering.
And this intense prayer leads to the actual ecstatic vision.
Yes, the spiritual embrace between Hermes and the disciple leads to that desired experience. Hermes, as pure spirit, beholds the power, the source of being itself. But he immediately stresses, you can't really talk about it. I have seen, speech cannot reveal it. Understanding God happens through direct spiritual sight, not words.
The core experience is beyond language, and even the disciples' vision is kept secret, too sacred to share openly.
Right. God is praised for his creative qualities, logos, love, but his essential being is indescribable. Importantly, this vision isn't self-deification. It's a passive gift from God to the pious. You prepare, but you can't force it. Humans are still created beings, naturata, within God's creation.
Naturabans. So it's this intense inner journey of purification leading to a potential divinely granted insight. But it's not meant to stay completely secret. You mentioned a kind of paradoxical mission.
Yes. Despite all the secrecy talk, the disciple promises to record the experience in an imperishable book, which is the Ogdode reveals the Enod itself, written in hieroglyphs on a turquoise steel, guarded symbolically. There's also a clear warning, almost an oath, to protect this knowledge from misuse. So you get this interesting mission through concealment. Share the true knowledge, but only with the worthy, pious, and discreet, keeping it hidden from the unprepared.
Fascinating tension between revealing and concealing. Okay, let's look at another text that sounds quite different, maybe even contradictory. The Kor Kosmu.
Ah, yes, the Kor Kosmu. It's a long, somewhat puzzling fragment from Stobaeus, and it does stand out for some internal inconsistencies in how it relates or doesn't quite relate to other Hermetic ideas. It lays out this elaborate myth about creation and the soul's journey, especially the human soul, presented as a dialogue between Isis and her son Horus.
A mother-son chat about the origin of souls. What's the basic story?
It starts with God creating an upper cosmos just for pneumatic beings, spiritual entities. Then he prepares this kind of invisible inspiration from divine pneuma, fire, and other stuff. From this, he makes 60 different types of immortal souls and assigns them to heaven, but with one condition: obedience. Disobey, and there'll be punishment later.
So even in heaven, there's rules and consequences. What happens after the souls are created?
Well, from the leftover spiritual stuff, God makes the signs of the zodiac both human-like and animal-like. Then, the higher, purer souls take on the job of creating the animals for the earth. But these animal-creating souls get arrogant because they lack self-knowledge. They rebel against God's command to stay put in heaven.
Pride again. Even among these primordial souls, what happens because of their rebellion?
As a result of their arrogance, God creates the object man, the physical human body, partly as a kind of prison for these rebellious souls. But there's another reason too. God feels his creations haven't praised him enough, so he gets Hermes to call a meeting of the gods to discuss creating humans specifically for this purpose.
So human existence is both a punishment for celestial rebellion and a way for God to get the praise he wants. That's quite a complex origin.
It gets even more layered. Before God actually makes the human body, The planetary gods give this future human both good and bad qualities, adding to our complex nature. Then Hermes fashions the physical body from the same soul froth used for animals, linking us to them. Finally, God tells the rebellious souls to go inhabit these human bodies. So becoming human is both punishment and a way for God to be praised.
Imprisoned yet purposeful all at once. How do these souls cope in their earthly bodies?
Well, God limits their suffering somewhat. Earthly life is governed by lovemaking and basic survival needs, but the souls can potentially return to heaven if they don't mess up too badly. Big transgressions, though, lead to rebirth in human or animal bodies. Still, the souls aren't happy. They long for heaven and often use their bodies to cause trouble: war, murder, oppression. Even the four elements complain to God about the chaos.
So our tendency towards conflict goes back to that original celestial rebellion. How does God try to fix this earthly mess?
He establishes civilization and reveals aspects of himself through Isis and Osiris. They lay the foundations for peaceful society law, religious cults, oaths, contracts. They teach humanity about the cosmos, introduce arts and sciences, and act as lawgivers, having learned from Hermes about the connection between higher and lower realms. They also ordained philosophy and magic for souls, medicine for bodies. The text ends with Isis and Osiris singing a hymn to God, celebrating how the soul rebellion was ultimately pacified through culture.
Sounds like a myth explaining the rise of civilization itself, with all its tensions. But you said this text is enigmatic and inconsistent.
Yes, the title, Kora Kosmu, Virgin of the World, isn't clearly explained by the content. And as we saw, the myth seems to blend two different ideas about human origins: punishment versus praise. The status of Earth also shifts from chaotic rebellion zone to a place of divine order after Isis and Osiris step in. It's a complex, maybe not perfectly stitched together story about cosmic history and the soul's journey.
Definitely sounds like one for scholars to puzzle over. Now let's move forward and see how later thinkers picked up these Hermetic ideas. Iamblichus, the big Neoplatonist philosopher in the 4th century CE, seems really important here.
Absolutely crucial. Iamblichus's work on the mysteries is really key for understanding how Hermetic ideas were received and used later on. For Iamblichus, Egyptian theology was pretty much the same thing as the wisdom of Hermes Trismegistus. He paints Hermes as this profound theologian and philosopher who understood existence as universal being and laid down basic ontotheological truths.
So Iamblichus basically promotes Hermes to the philosophical major leagues, fitting his ideas into a Neoplatonic framework. What are the key parts of his interpretation?
He describes a Neoplatonic cosmology. There is a pre-existent ultimate God, the prime principle, beyond even being and understanding, echoing that Henkai Pan, the one and all. This transcendent God creates, but without getting directly involved. From this source emanates the first self-sufficient God, cause of being, the intelligible, then gods of ether, fire, and sky, setting up this whole hierarchy of divine reality.
A cosmos, unfolding in levels from a single source, each less perfect than the one above. Where does Hermes fit into this hierarchy for Iamblichus?
Iamblichus sees Hermes as the prime witness to this hierarchical reality, where higher parts of the cosmos are naturally nobler, more divine, and lower parts are dependent, getting their being by participating in the higher. He reads Hermes as seeing the world as a divine unity unfolding into multiplicity. He explains this using Platonic ideas. Higher beings manifest in lower ones, giving them dignity and existence. And conversely, through disciplined thought dialectics, you can work backwards, discerning the spiritual within the material. The divine shows itself, symbolized in matter, pointing back to its transcendent origin.
So, you can read the material world like a symbolic map pointing to higher spiritual realities. What does this mean practically for someone trying to connect with the divine, in Iamblichus's view of Hermeticism?
It has big implications for theurgy, for divine invocation and ritual. According to Iamblichus's Hermes, the divine names used in theurgy have to be incomprehensible to human reason, because they target the divine essence which is beyond our intellect. And these names can't be translated because translation is a human language thing, it can't capture the divine power. So Iamblichus argues you have to deliberately switch off your human logos, your rational thinking, when using these sacred names to achieve real connection.
Wow, that's quite radical silencing reason to connect with the divine.
Yeah.
How does Iamblichus understand the human soul in this combined Hermetic Neoplatonic system?
For Iamblichus, psychology is tied up with theology and salvation. He attributes to Hermes the idea that humans have two souls. One participates in the intelligible realm, pure intellect, divine forms. The other is connected to the stars and influences the body through their movements. This lower soul comes from the stars at birth and returns after death to see the divine. But the higher, intellectual soul can actually ascend to the gods even while you're still alive in the body. And crucially, this higher soul isn't subject to fate. This opens a path for liberation. Through knowledge of God and the cosmos, you can free yourself from destiny.
So even stuck in a body, we have this potential through our intellect to connect directly with the divine and escape fate.
Yeah.
You can really see why Iamblichus's interpretation was so influential.
Oh, hugely. Many later writers and schools saw his account as the authoritative take on ancient Egyptian Hermeticism. He effectively blended Hermetic ideas with core Platonic and especially Neoplatonic concepts like emanation and a supreme reality beyond being and knowledge. His work really shaped how Hermeticism was understood for centuries.
Okay, so we've explored the lofty philosophical side. Let's pivot now to the more hands-on aspects. Hermes was also famous as an astrologer, a powerful magician, and a key figure in alchemy, right?
Absolutely. While astrology is kind of implicit in many core Hermetic ideas' planetary influence, heaven as origin and goal, the as above, so below idea, Hermes also had a very explicit role as an astrologer. Clement of Alexandria mentions astrological books of Hermes. Syncellus refers to the Genica of Hermes. Other works attributed to him include a Brontologion interpreting thunder and the Letra Mathematica of Hermes Trismegistus to the Egyptian Ammon, which is foundational for iatro mathematics applying astrology to medicine.
So a worldview where celestial events directly impact earthly life, especially health.
Exactly. The core idea is sympathy between the microcosm, man, and the macrocosm, cosmos. There was this doctrine where planets ruled specific body parts, linking star gods to illnesses and treatments. Texts like the Sacred Book of Hermes to Asclepius explain the iatromathematical meaning of the decans, those 36 divisions of the zodiac. Even plants had astrological links determining their therapeutic use, detailed in books like the Book of Hermes Trismegistus to Asclepius on the plants of the 7 stars.
It sounds like a whole system of cosmic medicine, with Hermes as the ultimate authority on these celestial health influences. And you mentioned the book on the 36 decans.
Yes, that's a more substantial astrological Hermetic text that survives, mainly in a later Latin manuscript. It's likely a compilation, probably drawing on older Egyptian ideas about the decans. It clearly states the astral sphere rules earthly life. The book lists all 36 decans, detailing their forms, sacred names, zodiac signs, the illnesses they influence, and even the geographical regions they rule over.
Like a cosmic diagnostic manual. And how does this astrology connect back to the bigger theological picture in Hermeticism?
Stobius' fragment Solcupt shows this link beautifully. Hermes advises his student Tat on the zodiac, sun, moon, planets, and the crucial role of the 36 decans. They sit between the orbit of the All and the zodiac, balancing cosmic movements, acting as watcher and guardian of everything. They're shown to have huge influence on Earth, causing major historical events, overthrow of kings, revolts, famines, plagues.
So the stars aren't just passive observers, they're active players in history and nature.
Indeed. And Hermes stresses that the point of astrology isn't just prediction, but achieving knowledge of God and self. It's a preliminary step towards the perfect sight of God after death. Interestingly, though, while he talks about the decan's influence and comets as omens, Hermes doesn't actually teach Tat how to use omens or cast birth charts. The focus seems more on the theological understanding of the cosmos.
So Hermetic astrology was less about personal fortune-telling, more about understanding our place in the grand cosmic scheme and connecting with the divine. Now let's shift to another side of Hermes, his reputation as a powerful magus.
Oh, he was definitely revered as a master magician. The Cyrenity, sometimes called Coordinity, is a good example. It's a collection attributed to Cyrenius, but claims divine origin traced back through angels to Hermes, then passed to worthy humans. Later books in it, originally called Hieratic Book on the Symptoms of Thrice Great Hermes, recommend using secretions from organic and inorganic things as sympathetic remedies. This works on the Hermetic idea of a great chain of being effects transmitting across different parts of the interconnected cosmos. The Cyrenity also brings in standard Hermetic themes: the soul's imprisonment, rule, release, and return to the Creator.
So magic based on cosmic interconnectedness, sympathetic resonance, and Hermes features heavily in the Greek magical papyri too, doesn't he?
Hugely. In the Papyri Graecae Magicae from Greco-Roman Egypt, mostly 2nd, 4th century CE, maybe some earlier bits, Hermes is invoked constantly for all sorts of magic: prophecy, love charms, harming enemies, protection, finding thieves. There's one really detailed ritual in a London papyrus for getting an oracle from Hermes. It involves making a figure of Hermes from specific stuff under the right moon, animating it with a prayer and question written in hieratic script inserted into it, another paper with prayers, the question hair, purple thread, an olive branch goes at its feet, plus incense and a special prayer calling Hermes Cosmocrator, world ruler, soul guide, sun's eye, speech inventor, fate foreknower, healer.
That's an amazing glimpse into popular practice. Hermes isn't the lofty philosopher there, but a powerful cosmic helper. You petition directly for earthly results, health, love, protection. You could make his image and compel a response through magic for practical needs, not just spiritual enlightenment.
Exactly. There's even a Berlin papyrus from Augustus's time titled Extract from the Magical Spells from the Sacred Book Found in Heliopolis, called the Book of Hermes, written in the Egyptian language and translated into Greek. It has love charms, healing spells, astrological bits, sun hymns showing that direct link between everyday magic and the Egyptian Hermes figure.
So this split again. Hermes the deep thinker and Hermes the magical problem solver. And then there's the third practical area, Hermes as a founder of alchemy.
Yes, Hermes Trismegistus and his ideas about nature belong right in the midst where late antique alchemy developed, probably starting in Hellenistic Egypt around the 1st century CE. Alchemy back then was this amazing blend of ideas, Aristotelian and Stoic elements, pantheistic or Gnostic concepts, Babylonian astrology, Egyptian myths like the Osiris story.
Another example of that incredible intellectual blending that seems to define Hermeticism. What was Hermes' specific role in early alchemy?
Well, the oldest chemical recipes we have are in things like the Leiden and Stockholm papyri, 3rd, 4th century CE, from a tomb in Thebes, giving coded instructions for making fake silver. But it's really Zosimus of Panopolis in the late 3rd, early 4th century, who's the first named alchemist to explicitly cite Hermes Trismegistus as a key authority, especially for what we call spiritual alchemy.
Spiritual alchemy. How's that different from just trying to turn lead into gold?
Zosimus quotes from a supposed book by Hermes called Book on Immateriality, where Hermes actually seems to reject magic. Instead, he advocates self-knowledge, knowing God, understanding the Trinity, and leaving the body to fate. This presents a really surprising Hermes, not a master magician, but a teacher of spiritual wisdom who thinks magic is fundamentally unhermetic.
Whoa, that's a curveball. The supposed source of magic rejecting it.
Right. And in his own work on the treatment of magnesia, Zosimus has this dialogue with Sister Theosebia, where he recommends the Hermetic texts Poimander and the Mixing Bowl of Hermes, which is Tractate 4th of the CH, as guides to spiritual perfection. The Mixing Bowl is read as a metaphor for a baptism in divine spirit, leading to knowledge of God. Zosimus says only those who truly know God will strive to return to their divine origin at death, choosing spirit over matter.
So for Zosimus, the real Hermetic path was inner spiritual change through knowledge and self-understanding, not literal metal bashing.
Exactly. Now, Zosimus also describes practical material alchemy formulas, equipment, techniques for quicksilver, dyeing, lab stuff. But the emphasis, drawing authority from Hermes, is on spiritual alchemy. For Zosimus, knowing self, God, and nature was the core of Hermeticism, and Hermes was primarily a spiritual guide, not just a technician changing metals.
It really seems ancient Hermeticism wasn't one single thing, but this broad umbrella covering so many different pursuits.
So stepping back, what was the essence? Who was this Egyptian super sage to the people who revered him? Well, Hermes was way more than just a sage. He was almost superhuman, like Odysseus or Zeus. In the magical papyri, he's ruler of the world, all-knowing, king of all knowledge, even the teacher of Isis and Osiris. But interestingly, he was also seen as mortal in some stories, ascending to become the planet Mercury after death. He was credited with inventing basically everything needed for civilization, bringing transcendent knowledge down to Earth, acting as this vital link between God and creation.
A culture hero, divine messenger, source of all knowledge, but maybe not fully divine himself, kind of bridging the gap.
Exactly. A teacher, a prophet, helping humans access hidden knowledge. And the reason why things like astrology, magic, alchemy all got included under the Hermetic banner was this shared underlying idea. The unity of the spiritual divine is imprinted onto the earthly world. Everything is connected, phenomena in both realms correspond. Everything has dignity because it's grounded in the higher spiritual divine. The celestial is reflected in the earthly.
So all these different practices were linked by this core belief in cosmic unity. As above, so below. But that basic idea wasn't unique to Hermeticists, was it? We see it elsewhere.
You're absolutely right. Similar ideas pop up in ancient Egyptian thought, Greek natural philosophy, Stoic universal sympathy, Neoplatonic cosmology. What made Hermeticism distinct was how it presented this blend of ideas as ancient, venerable Egyptian wisdom, revealed by Hermes Trismegistus himself to a select group of spiritually advanced adepts.
And this constant harping on the Egyptian origin seems crucial to its authority. Why was Egypt so important?
Egypt just had this incredibly powerful, long-standing reputation in the classical world as the ultimate source of ancient wisdom and secret knowledge. Plato in the Timaeus talks about Egypt preserving knowledge lost elsewhere, having a government close to the ideal. The idea that Egyptian knowledge survived catastrophes, that Hermes guarded this pre-flood lore. Syncellus mentions Manetho's story of the first Hermes writing before the flood, the second translating after that added to the mystique. And think of all the stories of famous Greeks going to Egypt for wisdom. Solon, Pythagoras, learning about transmigration, rituals, Isocrates mentioning Pythagoras, Diodorus Siculus listing Orpheus, Lycurgus, Solon, Plato, Pythagoras, all learning from Egyptians.
It was like Egypt was seen as the original wellspring, where all true ancient knowledge came from.
Precisely. Iamblichus argued forcefully for respecting Egyptian writings because he claimed they taught Pythagoras, Plato, Democritus, Eudoxus. Therefore, their knowledge must be valuable. Philosophy and theology started in Egypt, the highest source, because it was the oldest, most civilized, antiquity-guaranteed truth. Iamblichus even used Interpretatio Graeca to find an Egyptian hermetic core behind Greek culture. Sometimes this admiration even led to looking down on Greek ideas, like in the letter of Asclepius to King Emin, ch. 666, which claims Hermetic ideas are best in Egyptian. Greek is just dim. Ironically, that text only survives in Greek.
The paradox, it seems like a constant effort to legitimize Hermetic ideas by anchoring them in this idealized ancient Egypt, even if the connection was sometimes thin.
Exactly. The idea of the text being a flawed translation of a perfect Egyptian original is a common trope. We saw it in the Berlin Papyrus, and Iamblichus used it to explain Greek elements. Egypt, called the image of heaven, the temple of the world in the Asclepius, became this almost mythical source of all divine wisdom, and Hermes' writings were seen as capturing that ancient divine truth.
So what is the real essence of Hermeticism then? Is it genuinely Egyptian wisdom or more Hellenistic philosophy in Egyptian clothes?
Well, saying it's purely ancient Egyptian wisdom passed down directly is definitely an oversimplification. The scholarly debate about its roots, Greek, Egyptian, Iranian, Gnostic, has raged for ages. Opinion has swung back and forth. A.J. Festugière famously argued it was mostly Greek Hellenic ideas from a Platonic background, with Egyptian bits just for decoration. But after the Nag Hammadi finds, scholars started seeing more genuinely Egyptian concepts, connecting them to late temple texts or older myths. Today, many scholars think the Hermetic writings came from Hellenized Egyptian priests sharing their theology in the wider Hellenistic world. Garth Fowden is one proponent. Others, like B.H. Stricker, argued the content is Egyptian, just expressed in Greek. J.P. Mahe suggested they started as Egyptian wisdom sayings, later commented on by non-Egyptians. Ultimately, whether it's direct descent from Egyptian sources or more about structural similarities is still debated.
So it's a tangled web of influences, no easy answer, not one single source.
Exactly. You can't pin Hermetic writings down to one tradition, school, or religion. It's classic syncretism, a product of that intellectual fusion in Greco-Roman Egypt. Pulling apart the threads, Greek philosophy, Egyptian religion, maybe Iranian dualism, Gnostic ideas takes really detailed work. While it's hard to derive all the philosophy directly from Egypt, there are definitely impressive parallels suggesting Egyptian influence. For instance, Egyptian decan doctrine developed alongside Babylonian astrology, and that matches the Hermetica. Decans were symbols of regeneration, protectors of the dead in Egypt, linked to destiny like stars in Hermetica, believed to affect weather, disease, body parts. The Demotic Book of Thoth, a dialogue between knowledge lovers, probably saw, might be a link between older Egyptian wisdom literature, teacher-student spiritual rebirth, and late antique Hermeticism. But bottom line, we have to understand these texts primarily against the background of late classical Hellenism. Searching for one single origin is probably futile.
One theme that keeps coming up is that basic polarity. Spirit versus matter. How does that work in the Hermetic view?
Generally, the Hermetic cosmos has these two extremes, spiritual and material, in a clear hierarchy. God's spirit is good, noble. Matter physical drives are less good, maybe even bad if they get in the way of spirit. Beings closer to spirit are closer to God. Those dominated by the body risk drifting away. Humans are at a crossroads, able to choose the path of spirit or body and idea shared with other classical philosophies.
So the material world isn't inherently evil, but it's a problem if it blocks our spiritual connection.
Precisely. The body world isn't evil in itself, only contemptible if it interferes with the spirit's ability to know. When the body serves the spirit, it has a valid role caring for creation, using physical skills for living, procreation. Sexuality itself is often justified, even valorized, for procreation, and as echoing divine creation, maybe reflecting God's own androgyny. Crucially, this makes Hermeticism very different from Gnosticism, which typically sees the material world as evil, made by a lesser, bad creator, cut off from a good transcendent God. Hermetic texts usually see the world as ordered beauty, created by divine agents, not a Gnostic veil of tears.
But there is still that longing for release from the material world that feels a bit Gnostic.
Yes, there's definitely that yearning for liberation from the finite material existence, a desire to return to God or celestial origins, a regressus ad uterum. This creates a kind of ambivalent attitude towards the world, celebrated as God's creation, but earthly things also held in contempt for being temporary and distracting. This spirit matter tension can seem symbiotic or potentially conflicting, which is why scholars sometimes talk about monistic optimistic versus dualistic pessimistic strands within Hermeticism.
Lastly, what about Hermetic practice? Was it a mystery cult with rituals or more a philosophical reading group?
Well, the Hermetica often describe initiations leading to deeper divine knowledge, striving for spiritual rebirth, emphasizing the soul's experience. Zosimus contrasting metal transformation with the alchemist's spiritual transformation highlights this focus on inner change first. The Ogdoad reveals the Any really stresses an inner path. Hermes' teaching needs a soul event in the disciple, triggered by the teacher, mystigog, not just words. Worship and prayer are often framed as inner experiences, not external rituals.
So the core initiation seems internal, psychological, spiritual, not a big public ceremony.
That seems to be the main thrust, especially in the philosophical texts. This idea of inner meaning over outward ritual goes back to Plato criticizing mystery cults like Eleusis if done without real inner feeling, thinking sacrifice alone brought forgiveness. Plato argued philosophy was better for knowing the divine, freeing you from death fear, calling for spiritual initiation, rebirth through the soul's thinking, dialectics, not mystery plays. Think of Socrates' initiation by Diotima in the Symposium, leading to knowing the good via beauty, seeing the forms. The philosophical Hermetica fit into this tradition of transforming mysteries into epistemology, inner processes, making the Hermeticist a new man. Rituals, like the magical names in the Nag Hammadi text, seem secondary. Hermes even argues against incense burning in the Asclepius.
But that contrasts sharply with the very ritualistic magic in the papyri and the astrological medicine also linked to Hermes.
Yes, and that contrast highlights a fundamental difference between these two broad groups under the Hermetic name. The magical papyri, the iatra mathematics, they're aimed at tangible earthly results: health, luck, protection. The philosophical texts focus on inner ascent, divine knowledge. The central goal in learned Hermeticism was often the soul's ascent to heaven, a more literal journey into the spheres beyond the moon than Plato's metaphorical afterlife. Kore Kosmu has souls longing to return home. Poyander's goal is ascending, shedding lower soul parts to planets, entering the eighth sphere to merge with God. Only the noble, divine soul, originally from heaven and free from fate, could make this journey.
So a clear split in focus and practice. Was Fischer's old division between vulgar popular and learned Hermetica useful for understanding this?
While we avoid those loaded terms, now technical Hermetica is better, the basic distinction Fischer saw still has some value. Researchers like Garth Fowding use it in modified form. The question is, are they totally separate categories linked only by Hermes' name, maybe for different audiences with different needs, as Fischer thought? Current research tends to stress the connections between the group's astrological bits in the CH, Deacon doctrine in Stobaeus next to theology, magical names in Nag Hammadi alongside Asclepius quotes. A strict separation looks less likely now, but ordering them as some kind of curriculum is pure speculation.
And what about the social setting? Were there actual Hermetic communities with cults, or was it mostly individuals reading these texts?
That's the big Sitsim. Those seeing it as mainly Greco-Hellenistic philosophy tend to view the texts as reading material for inner experience, like Platonic teaching. Those focusing on Nag Hammadi texts see hints of communal prayer, maybe actual cult groups. The magical astrological texts were clearly for everyday practical use. Looking at the whole range, it's likely these texts had social importance beyond just private reading. What was true for one text or group might not apply to all. There's no proof of one single social group that knew all these writings. Different texts probably served different functions in different circles. Learned Hermeticism often reads ritual references allegorically, but Gnostic-singed texts mention cult more often. Maybe there was a cult aspect in Gnostic groups who also read Hermetica, while Platonist types used them intellectually. Ultimately, you can't find one single system of Hermeticism. It's more a broad literary field with common themes. Secret knowledge passed down, revealing the interconnected essence of the cosmos, man, God, mostly not Gnostic, world as ordered beauty, dualism, complementary. Humans as special, body, soul, dignity, task to praise God, maintain world, soul primary, danger from body needing awareness of divine origin.
So after plumbing these depths, the mythical origins, the incredibly varied texts, the shifting interpretations, we've certainly covered some complex ground. It seems this thrice great figure, born from mixing cultures and credited with so much, just keeps fascinating us.
Indeed. From that potent blend of Egyptian and Greek gods through this sprawling library covering philosophy, magic, astrology, alchemy, the story of Hermes really speaks to our ongoing search for wisdom, for meaning, for connection to something bigger than ourselves. This deep dive has really shown the intricate, multifaceted nature of Hermeticism and its quiet persistence through Western thought.
And pulling these ancient threads into your own world, whether you're preserving the past, creating the future in art, or mapping knowledge. Hopefully this exploration has sparked some new angles, maybe even one of those aha moments that pushes you further.
It does leave you wondering, doesn't it? Thinking about this figure born from fusion, credited with so much. What does our continuing fascination with Hermes Trismegistus really say about our perennial quest for wisdom and how we construct authority, especially in those more esoteric areas, just beyond easy understanding?
A really good question to mull over as you continue your own explorations. We absolutely encourage you to dig deeper into the sources we've touched on, follow the threads that sparked your interest. Hopefully this deep dive hasn't been an ending, but more like a really interesting signpost for your ongoing journey into these complex ideas.
And remember, in this dense forest of ideas, the best shortcut isn't skipping the path, but having enthusiastic guides to point out the most intriguing routes, always valuing your time and your intellectual curiosity. Welcome, friend. Come on in, settle into our, well, let's call it a mytho-academic salon for tonight.
I like that. A space for the strange and the sacred.
Exactly. And tonight, we're diving deep, following a thread of curiosity into something truly fascinating: Orphic textuality in the ancient world.
Yeah, we've been looking at some compelling ideas, particularly from Making Port Storm, Part 12, Redefining Ancient Orphism. It really makes you rethink things.
It does. Our mission tonight, if you will, isn't just to label Orphic texts as, ancient scriptures like finding a lost gospel or something.
Yeah, it's much more nuanced than that.
We want to explore how these writings actually worked back then, how they were used, especially in classical Athens with all its rituals and intellectual debates.
Moving beyond that sort of stained glass window view, perhaps.
Yeah, to look at the workshop, see how the glass was actually made and handled.
Precisely. Peeling back those layers. It might seem a bit labyrinthine, this topic.
It can be complex, for sure.
But we'll try to keep things clear. So where do we start? Maybe with the big misconception. The myth of Orphic scriptures.
Good starting point, because this idea, it's really shaped how people have viewed Orphism for a long time, hasn't it?
Definitely. This picture of Orphism as a religion of the book, almost like it had its own Old Testament or something.
Perfect Bible.
But the sources suggest it's probably not accurate. There wasn't just one way people thought about or used these texts.
Which, considering how decentralized religion was in ancient Greece, generally, it makes sense, right? No central authority dictating the sacred text.
Exactly. But where did this idea get legs? Euripides is often brought up.
Hippolytus. Theseus's line.
That's the one. He's furious, right?
Yeah.
And he mocks Hippolytus' followers, linking them to Orpheus and saying they honor the vaporings of many books.
Vaporing, such a great word. Dismissive, like they're just lost in some textual fog.
Pretty much. But we have to remember, this is drama. It's Theseus speaking, in character, angry.
It's rhetoric, not necessarily a factual report on Orphic practice.
Right. It's like using a single angry comment online to define a whole movement. You just can't.
Good analogy.
And this focus on books, maybe fueled by lines like that, seems to have skewed scholarship a bit. It led to a big focus on cosmogony, the creation stories.
Because if you're looking for scripture, you look for the foundational texts, the origins.
Right, the logic. But maybe that meant other important myths. Demeter Dionysus got sidelined. in how we studied Orphica.
Like focusing only on Genesis and ignoring the Psalms or the prophets.
Something like that. So the takeaway isn't just no Orphic Bible, it's that the whole concept of a single authoritative scripture might not fit how these texts were actually used.
So maybe this whole textual orientation is more about us looking back than how they saw it then. Okay, so if they weren't scriptures in that sense, what was going on with this hubbub of books in Athens?
Now it gets really interesting. Plato mentions it too in the Republic. This hubbub of books linked to Orpheus and Musaios, used by certain religious types.
Hubbub. It sounds less like a quiet library, more like a bustling marketplace.
Exactly, and the context is key. 5th century Athens. It's a time of massive change, right? Moving from purely oral traditions towards more writing.
So real competition for, what did the source call it? Discursive authority.
Yeah. Everyone's trying to make their voice heard, establish their expertise.
And using books wasn't just an Orphic thing.
Not at all. You had sophists, doctors, diviners, lots of experts using texts to back up their claims. Think of Gorgias, Protagoras, Antiphon. Scrolls were like their badges of honor, their proof of wisdom.
Intellectuals armed with papyrus.
Kinda, yeah. And in the religious sphere, it was similar. People using books associated with Orpheus weren't necessarily all following the same book. They were often making competing claims.
So using the Orpheus brand name maybe, but for their own interpretations.
Precisely. Leveraging that authority. It wasn't about rigid adherence, it was strategic.
So the hubbub is the sound of different voices, different interpretations, all maybe claiming some link to Orpheus.
You got it. And the Dervini Papyrus, that amazing find, it's a perfect example. It's not a fixed scripture, it's a commentary, an interpretation of an Orphic poem. It shows how these texts generated more discussion, more layers.
Which leads us to this idea of bibliolatry, book worship. The source critiques that older view.
And it's a really important critique. Some earlier scholars kind of mapped Protestant reverence for the Bible onto the Orphics. Mo made this analogy. Orphics are to mainstream Greeks like Protestants are to Catholics.
That feels fraught. Like comparing apples and, I don't know, ancient pomegranates, applying a very specific later religious framework onto a totally different culture.
Exactly. It's anachronistic, trying to fit ancient polytheism into modern boxes of religion and scripture. Janko's comparison is brilliant here. He talks about the Dervini author using bits of pre-Socratic philosophy to interpret the Orphic poem. He says it's like using Nietzsche to interpret the Book of Mormon.
Right, it highlights the mismatch. It assumes the Orphic poem was seen as this untouchable, holy text that you couldn't interpret allegorically using contemporary philosophy.
Exactly. But that assumes a kind of literalist mindset that might not have even existed in the same way. It puts too much emphasis on faith in a way that doesn't quite fit the ancient Greek context.
So this idea of the Orphic exception, that Orphism was uniquely a religion of the book in Greece, unlike everything else that's shaky too.
Very shaky. Parker, who suggested it, actually did amazing work dismantling older ideas about Greek religion. But this exception idea kind of undermines that. Religions of the book, like Judaism or Christianity, treat texts as canonical guides in a way that Greek myths, which were fluid and adaptable, just weren't.
And the assumption that all Orphic poems were about the afterlife, escaping some titanic guilt from the Zagreus myth, that's another layer we should question.
Absolutely. That whole idea of inherent guilt from the Titans killing Zagreus, it seems to be a much later interpretation, possibly Neoplatonic. To read that back into all early Orphic material is a big leap. We're better off applying what we generally know about Greek religion to Orphic stuff, rather than carving out this exception based on later ideas.
Okay, so if they weren't scriptures in our sense, maybe they were ritual texts, liturgies, prescriptions for ceremonies.
That's another avenue people have explored. Burkert pointed out parallels with the Near East, where creation myths, cosmogonies, were sometimes used in rituals.
Reciting the creation story to restore order, maybe? A kind of verbal magic?
Something like that.
Yeah.
And there was definitely contact between Greece and the Near East, so it's plausible the idea traveled, but the source urges caution.
Why? Lack of direct Greek evidence.
Pretty much. We don't have clear, unambiguous proof that Greeks used their creation myths in, say, healing rituals or purifications in quite the same way Mesopotamians might have used theirs. And even in Mesopotamia, reciting the Enuma Eliah was just one part of a bigger ritual complex, like the New Year festival in Babylon. It had a specific cultural weight there that wouldn't just automatically transfer.
And how exactly reciting a myth, even the Zagreus one, would function in a Greek purification? It's not immediately obvious how it fits their usual patterns of identifying an offense and appeasing a god.
Right. The Mesopotamian idea is often about restoring cosmic balance. The Greek focus is often more specific, figuring out who's angry and why. Simply telling the Zagreus story doesn't obviously achieve that.
And again, cosmology was just one theme in Orphic poetry. Assuming everything served this ritual function might be missing the bigger picture.
Exactly. We need to avoid forcing everything into one functional box.
Which brings us back then to Athens and that hubbub of books. The idea that linking Orpheus with texts has more to do with 5th century Athenian culture, with books becoming tools for claiming wisdom.
Yes, those using Orphic texts were playing the same game as others. Sophists used rhetorical treatises, Antiphon's tetralogies, Gorgias on Helen. Experts had specialized texts like Antiphon on dream interpretation.
Diviners had oracle collections.
Right. Mantees, politicians, they all used collections of oracles to seem authoritative. Isocrates tells a story about that, and Aristophanes jokes about it in Knights.
So having the book, or claiming to have the right book, was almost a performance of expertise.
Absolutely. It symbolized knowledge, whether people actually read or understood the details or not. It was about projecting authority in these ongoing wisdom contests.
Wisdom contests, like the story of Onomikritos.
Ah, yes. Caught supposedly slipping his own lines into an oracle of Musaios and getting banished.
Sounds less like heresy and more like professional foul play, like being caught cheating in an intellectual competition.
That's a strong possibility. Dillery argued it was likely a wisdom contest who could best interpret or recite these obscure texts. Getting caught adding might have meant you weren't skilled enough to work with what was there, you had to fake it.
So the book is a prop in the performance of authority.
Well put. And that's the perfect lens, really, for looking at the Dervini author.
Seeing him as one of these competing specialists using Orphic texts.
Exactly. His complex, allegorical interpretation of the Orphic poem. That's his display.
Yeah.
His way of showing off his deep knowledge and skill, just like sophists interpreting Homer or experts interpreting oracles.
He claims Orpheus spoke in riddles, and he's the one who can decode them.
Precisely. He insists every single word matters, leading to some, well, let's say creative interpretations.
Like the phallus meaning the sun, or Eas meaning good.
Yeah. To us, maybe based on the, historical linguistics, it seems bizarre. But in that context, it showed his cleverness, his ability to wring meaning out of the text, connecting it to current philosophical ideas about cosmology.
He's basically shouting, "Look how smart I am. I can find hidden depths here."
Pretty much. And he wasn't unique. Think of Tiresias and Euripides Bacchae, or figures like Lampon or Euthyphro. They used similar interpretive tools. It wasn't necessarily seen as wrecking religion. Maybe it was seen as enhancing it, finding deeper meanings.
Right. Okay, so if being Orphic wasn't mainly about the texts themselves or a strict doctrine, what was it? What made someone Orphic?
The key seems to be invoking Orpheus's name as the authority figure, claiming you had special knowledge derived from him about rituals, purifications, sacrifices, initiations, teletai, divination.
So it's about aligning yourself with the Orpheus brand, the ancient wisdom he represented.
Exactly. Compare that to someone like Empedocles, who claimed divine authority in his own name. Different strategy. The Dervini author is Orphic because he explicitly bases his authority on interpreting Orpheus.
And the Dervini text itself supports this looser definition, doesn't it? Since it lacks things like titanic guilt or metempsychosis, things later considered central to Orphism.
Big time. Their absence is really telling. It reinforces Burkert's idea.
Yeah.
Maybe what mattered wasn't strict doctrine, but demonstrating professional skill, offering religious services under that respected Orphic banner.
Yeah.
The Dervini papyrus could almost be seen as, well, an advert for the author's expertise.
Right, so we move from Orphic religion to Orphic expertise linked by the name and maybe certain types of ritual knowledge. So what about the content then? What kind of stories did these poems tell?
Good question. The Orphic Argonauticus prologue, though it's later, gives a decent overview. Cosmogony, myths about Demeter and Dionysus and their circles, and stories about Orpheus himself.
Okay, let's break those down. Cosmogony first. What made an Orphic creation story Orphic?
Often, they use the same basic ingredients as, say, Hesiod, but they twisted them, rearranged them in strange, deviant ways.
How so?
Think of the cosmic egg being super important, or Zeus swallowing the whole cosmos to regenerate it. These are known motifs, but they get foregrounded or altered in ways that feel, different, maybe more philosophical or bizarre.
Like remixing familiar tunes into something avant-garde.
That's a good way to put it. And not even all Orphic cosmogonies had the egg or the swallowing Zeus. There wasn't one standard version. This deviation probably made them attractive for people exploring new ideas about the universe.
And they often had that exclusive feel. Keep out, uninitiated.
Definitely. Phrases like "close the doors of your ears, ye profane." The Dravini texts show that. This wasn't common knowledge, it was presented as deep, secret wisdom.
Okay, so strange, deviant, esoteric takes on creation. What about poems for the sacred rites?
Orpheus was seen as the poet for certain rituals, especially those around Demeter, Persephone, mother of the gods, Hecate and Dionysus, often the more ecstatic Bacchic side.
Gods often linked with mystery cults, right?
Exactly. The poems told stories about these gods, their suffering, their triumphs. Maybe not origin stories for the cults themselves, but hymns celebrating the gods' nature, deepening the connection for worshippers. Hymnos physicos, celebrating the god's essence.
Like the Demeter and Persephone myth for Eleusis? The mourning mother, the daughter's return? That's powerful stuff.
Hugely powerful, and ancient writers saw the pattern. They grouped myths like that with Isis and Osiris, Aphrodite and Adonis, mourning goddesses. Orpheus was credited with poems about many of them. It was a theme.
And Dionysus, his myths often involve arrival, resistance, dismemberment.
Yes. While dismemberment pops up elsewhere too, Orpheus became the go-to authority for poems used in Dionysiac rites. We don't have many exact texts, but they likely focused on the god's struggles and victory, reinforcing the core themes of his worship.
Which brings us to the wonderfully named alien and perverse tales. What's going on there?
This highlights how the Orphic label often got stuck onto myths that felt foreign or just weird compared to mainstream Greek stories. They emphasized the exotic side of the gods, Zeus being Cretan, Cybele being Phrygian, Demeter Egyptian. Orpheus became the stamp of authenticity for the unusual.
So Orphic could mean strange or foreign.
Awesome, yeah. Pausanias was skeptical about most Orphic poems, but made an exception for some hymns he thought were genuinely ancient. The form might have been more like the concise, elusive Homeric hymns rather than big epics.
And the Orpheus name maybe gave legitimacy to newer or stranger rites?
Seems like it. And common patterns like baby Zeus, Dionysus myths, or goddess abductions allowed for lots of innovation, sometimes producing quite shocking stories, all under this Orphic banner.
And finally, Orpheus' own descent to the underworld, the classic story.
It is classic. But interestingly, ancient sources don't usually say Orpheus got his knowledge of the afterlife in his own trip down there. Those gold tablets found in graves, the instructions for the dead. They read more like oracle responses and bits of a narrative poem about his descent.
That's unexpected. So Orphic myth draws on the common pool, but constantly pushes towards the exotic, the strange, the deviant.
I think that's a great summary. That element of otherness, that departure from the norm, is probably why these myths remain so fascinating and kept getting reinterpreted.
So pulling it all together, we've moved past Orphic texts as just scriptures. We see them in this buzzing, competitive Athenian scene. The link to Orpheus is less about doctrine, more about claiming authority, expertise, often through these really unusual, compelling myths.
Exactly. It's not one neat Orphic mythology. It's more like a bewildering array of practices and stories, all connected by that powerful, magical name of Orpheus.
Which leaves us with a thought, doesn't it? If Orphic was this fluid, this contested, how many other categories we use for ancient thought, religious, philosophical, might also be less stable than we think? Maybe the lines we draw are more porous, the whole landscape more dynamic than our neat labels suggest. Something to chew on, perhaps, as we continue exploring. you.